Chapter 130. This was a clean and bright large room. The surrounding walls and decorations were very light, from white to yellow, making it very comfortable to look at. There was a small table by the window, and under the table was a fluffy blanket. On the blanket was a girl wearing an ordinary white gauze dress. The girl sat by the table, quietly reading a thick book on the table. Her messy short purple hair covered her ears, but her sparkling and tender earlobes playfully poked out from the messy purple hair. The bright and beautiful sunlight shone in from the window. There was not a speck of dust in the light. It was so clear, and when it shone on her face, it made her expression even more dazzling. Her long eyelashes quietly rested on the girl's eyelids, and her white jade-like cheeks slightly blushed under the sunlight. The thickness of the book was thicker than her hands, making her pair of soft and boneless hands look very delicate. Under the afternoon sun, the pure girl seemed to be reading a book, but it was more like she was sleeping soundly. Purple hair fell from her smooth forehead, like a grape leaf, gently caressing the girl in her sleep. This was a moving picture. Sulo was moved. He stared blankly at the sunlight not far from the bed. Looking at the girl under the sunlight, he felt that his eyes were a little dry, and that his brain was not enough. The picture in front of him seemed to be still, but it was so vivid. It was like the poster that the uncle had hung in the operation room of the mine, but the girl who should have appeared on the poster was a little more mature than when she was 14 years old. She was still an incomparably charming girl, but her eyebrows, that straight nose, and those crystal hairs clearly visible under the light all told him, this is Jian Shuier, this is the real Jian Shuier, this is a living Jian Shuier. Sulo wanted to rub his eyes, but he felt a sharp pain coming from his right arm. He almost cried out, but because of the loss of voice in his throat, it turned into a muffled sound in his throat. With difficulty, he moved his gaze away from the window and looked down at his body. He saw that there were a few pipes connected to his body, and he was lying on a snow-white bed. There was an emergency button and an oxygen channel beside his hand. It seemed to be a hospital bed. The memories before he fainted had already returned to his mind. He knew that everything in front of him was not a dream, although it was very much like a dream. He didn't know how he survived and appeared in this ward when he was clearly about to die in the hands of that militant. Sulo was a very calm person. From the sunlight shining in through the window, he knew that he had definitely left Linhai Prefecture. That snowy world shouldn't have such bright sunlight, but in the next moment, he wasn't sure. What if he had been unconscious for half a year and it was already summer in Linhai Prefecture? Who saved him in that desperate situation? Sulo stared blankly at the purple-haired girl by the window. He didn't understand how Jian Shuier came out of the dream and quietly fell asleep by his bedside while holding a book. But he survived. This fact made Sulo feel incomparably relaxed and happy. In his nearly 20 years of life, this was the first time he was so close to death. It made him seem like he had a new understanding of life. At this moment, he thought of the strange black dream he had when he was unconscious, but he immediately threw that strange dream to the back of his mind. Because there was a dream in front of him. If the strange dream in the black space was a nightmare, then the moving scene in front of him was a beautiful dream. A beautiful dream come true. After waking up from the coma, Sulo gradually woke up. His brain gradually regained control of his body. This also meant that his body's perception could accurately enter his brain. After a slight numbness, there was a feeling of tension and dryness everywhere. Then, Sulo felt an unprecedented pain. He could feel something in his right leg. It was a painful feeling. He felt that his leg was like a glassware that had been smashed into pieces and then reassembled. It was full of cracks, and every crack was a pain. And his body was left with an unknown number of wounds, all of which were painful at the same time. What was even more terrifying was that inside his body, behind his neck, every bone, every pair of muscle fibers began to ache. It was as if he had experienced countless exercises, causing irreparable damage. With a muffled groan, Sulo stared at the snow-white ceiling. His habitual squinting eyes stared fixedly at that spot. A few drops of cold sweat flowed down from his forehead, along the skin around his ears, and flowed to the pillow. He was very strong, and his endurance was very strong. He was a stone from Dong Lin, but under this kind of pain, he was almost unable to bear it. He had to find a way to divert the pain from his surroundings. It was the same principle as how agents like to watch pornographic movies when they were cutting flesh to remove bullets. Fortunately, there was a scene in the room that was enough to completely attract Su Li's attention. With great difficulty, he turned his neck and looked at the purple-haired girl by the window. Su Li's grunt on the bed woke the purple-haired girl by the window. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly as she woke up from her sleep. Rubbing her eyes, she appeared to be in a daze. Looking at the thick book in her hand, she cutely stuck out her tongue and smiled. Then she stood up and stretched as much as she could under the sunlight. She clenched her fists under the sunlight and raised her arms, stretching her body as much as she could. This posture completely exposed the curves of her body. Su Lo, who was on the bed, watched the sunlight pass through the transparent glass window, through the clean air, and sprinkle on the white-shirted girl's body. For a moment, he couldn't help but be stunned, forgetting the pain that was everywhere in his body. The sunlight sprinkled down, penetrating the white dress on the girl's body. The white dress was very light, and under such direct sunlight, it didn't provide much of a cover. The white dress was almost transparent under the sunlight, gently covering the youthful girl's body. Especially when looking from the back of the bed, the magnolia-like body could be seen even more clearly. In the clear light screen, the girl's soft curves were wrapped in a white tube top. Her waist and lower abdomen were glowing with white light. She was very beautiful. Su Lo looked at this scene in shock and subconsciously wanted to close his eyes. In the past, Uncle Feng Yu once told Su Lo that if he met a girl in his youth, and she was very beautiful, but he didn't want to peek at her body, and he didn't dare to fantasize about things related to lust in his mind, then it proved that he liked her, and it was a true kind of like. Su Li's youth had already ended, and he had entered his youth. However, in the long 20 years of his life, he only had this kind of feeling for two people. One was Zhang Xiaomeng, and the other was this purple-haired little girl in front of him. For him, Jian Shui'er was an unreachable dream. She was the object of his incomparable inferiority when he shouted loudly that he wanted to marry her. However, she was also the memory that accompanied him day and night. In Su Li's heart, Jian Shui'er was a composite of many emotions. At some point, he even thought very self-deprecatingly that he actually treated this idol of the Federation as his own little sister. This was because he had a very innate sense of intimacy with her, just like when he saw Xian Yi, therefore, he wanted to close his eyes. He always felt that peeking at that white dress was a kind of blasphemy to her. However, Su Le had already seen those erotic scenes. At this moment, he couldn't treat her as a family member at all. He only knew that he saw a beauty that countless men of the Federation wanted to see but never got to see. At this moment, he, who was extremely weak, felt the most intense stimulation. It was even more lethal than all of the various, naked, and incomparably seductive women in that strange dark dream combined. The Federation idol, who was wearing a white dress and had a head of messy purple hair, squinted her eyes slightly under the sunlight in the ward. She enjoyed the sunlight that hit her in the face. Her sandalwood lips parted slightly, and she sighed in satisfaction, adding to her charming beauty. A light tearing sound rang out in the ward. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly, and she tilted her head to look at her white dress. She said in distress, "Poor dress. It has accompanied me for 4 years. Why did it tear with a wave of my hand? Did I really gain weight?" Her eyebrows furrowed as she asked herself pitifully. "No, you've grown up." Su Lo stared at the youthful figure under the white dress. How could she have thought that the little lover of her dreams would actually say such a ridiculous thing? After he explained for her in his heart, he couldn't bear the mental stimulation and the physical torture anymore. His eyes turned black, his head tilted to the side, and he directly fainted. Jian Shui'er seemed to have noticed the slight movement on the bed. After a slight pause, she walked over to the bed. She stared blankly at the young man on the bed who was still in a coma. Looking at the young man's ordinary face, she naturally thought of the thrilling scene after the concert. She thought of how she and Sister Tong saved this guy from a pool of blood. Looking at the cold sweat on the young man's face, Jian Shuier tilted her head, took out a towel from beside the pillow, and randomly wiped him. Then, she threw the towel aside and began to stare at Su Li's face in a daze. At this time, the door of the ward was pushed open. Jian Shuier didn't need to turn around to know that the person who dared to break into the ward without her permission must be Sister Tong. A woman in her 30s walked into the ward. She looked at the scene next to the bed and frowned. Her eyes were full of disapproval. She looked at Jian Shuier and said, "Miss, even if you want to avoid the reporters and prepare for the entrance exam in spring, I don't think you need to come to the hospital every day. What's more, in my opinion, you didn't spend your time studying." Jian Shuier smiled and replied, "There shouldn't be a problem with my homework. The TV station's officers and reporters are equally annoying. After all the choices, it seems that this hospital is the most secretive." She turned her head and quietly looked at Su Li's face on the bed. She also felt a little strange in her heart. Why did she feel so familiar when she saw this person? Why did she always give her a quiet and intimate feeling when she was in a coma? It was as if she had seen him a long time ago. Jian Shuiyer's eyes slid over Su Li's exposed arm and glanced at the metal bracelet. She didn't pay too much attention to it. Chapter 131. The middle-aged woman named Sister Tong wasn't Jian Shuiyer's manager, because the entire Federation knew that Jian Shuier didn't belong to any management company, and she didn't have any famous manager behind her. She only had a cooperative relationship with the TV station. Jian Shuier had a studio that specifically served her, and Sister Tong wasn't within the scope of that studio. Her eyes swept past Jian Shuiyer's body, and she frowned and said, "I remember that this dress was from 4 years ago. Miss, for your image, I think it's better to donate this dress to the refugees in Area S2. Jian Shuier helplessly spread out her hands and said, "I broke it because I was too lazy, so I couldn't donate it even if I wanted to. I thought that since no one would disturb me in the hospital, I could read some books, relax, and wear clothes that I wouldn't normally wear." As she moved, her messy purple hair swayed back and forth, making her look very cute. This idol of the Federation was truly a peerless figure with all kinds of charm. There was one side on the stage, one side on the TV screen, and another side in private. However, no matter which side Jian Shuier was on, she was always so charming. Seeing that Jian Shuier was still sitting next to the bed, Sister Tong sighed helplessly. She stared at the unconscious young man behind her and said, "This person's identity has been found." Jian Shuier was surprised. "We've already contacted the Tai family. Miss, at least you can rest assured that he wasn't involved in the assassination. But I'm very curious, why would the master of the 4th Military Region disguise himself, and suddenly appear next to the heir of the Tai family?" Sister Tong narrowed her eyes and stared at Su Lu on the bed. Her eyes were extremely vigilant, and that sharp cold light revealed her true identity as a soldier. A few days ago, in the underground parking lot, she had seen with her own eyes that the unconscious kid on the hospital bed had jumped into the darkness like a fearless wolf. That kind of ruthlessness, the strength and speed of that figure, as well as the skills that he had displayed at the end, all showed that this kid was an out-and-out killing machine. However, after this killing machine fell into a coma, other than the painful and twisted expression of a nightmare, there was only calmness, peace, and simplicity on its ordinary face. Sister Tong stared at Su Li's face. She couldn't imagine that such a terrifying method was hidden under such an ordinary and honest expression. This contrast even made her feel a little cold. Therefore, she didn't want Jian Shuier to appear in this ward, and she didn't want her to be so close to that guy. On the first day of the 67th year of the constitutional era, Jian Shuier completed her first concert in Linhai Prefecture. Although she was the dream lover of countless people in the Federation, the standard national idol, like every young girl, she would fall into a state of joy and excitement after achieving one of her dreams. Thus, she decided to do something very daring. Before the age of 14, she appeared on the screen of Channel 23 of the Federation, triggering a long and drawn-out lawsuit between the Children's Rights Protection Fund and the Federation. She received such a comment from the Chief Justice of the Federation. Jian Shui'er had been used to managing her own life since she was young. No one could stop any of her decisions, including elder sister Tong, who was nominally sent by the Children's Rights Protection Fund. Jian Shui'er wanted to walk around Linhai as an ordinary person, because she had never been to a university town with a long history. When she was in the special district of the capital, she often disguised herself and accompanied by elder sister Tong to chat with the elderly on the bus. She also pretended to be an ordinary female student on the subway. The staff in the studio had long been used to her whimsical ideas. Elder sister Tong, as usual, expressed strong opposition, but couldn't stop her. The assistant's luxury car, escorted by the police car specially sent by the Linhai Police Headquarters, roared away amidst the enthusiastic cheers of the people in the university town of Linhai. On the other hand, Jian Shui'er and sister Tong were prepared to dress up and wait quietly and happily in a room. When they confirmed that the audience in the stadium had left, they went from the backstage to the VIP area. Along the empty area, they walked toward the underground parking lot where the vehicles had already been prepared. Along the way, they saw blood, corpses, and traces of battle. In the distance, they could faintly hear the sound of gunfire. They didn't dare to take the elevator, but the lights in the stairs were flashing. On the snow-white walls, blood stains were occasionally illuminated. The scene was extremely terrifying. Jian Shui'er didn't want to recall this part of the journey anymore. She had lived under the spotlight since she was a child. She was protected by the applause and cheers of the Federation citizens. When had she ever seen such a terrifying scene with her own eyes? However, because of the powerful family name she inherited, at least no one made her pale, trembling, squat in the corner of the building and really play the role of a pitiful girl. She bravely followed elder sister Tong and walked forward in the flickering stadium. At this time, elder sister Tong had already informed her subordinates to take out the guns hidden at their waists. However, this outstanding female soldier didn't immediately change their route and take the young miss to escape from the other exits of the stadium. This was because she keenly sensed that there seemed to be a team in front of them that was constantly clearing out the armed forces along the way, clearing the obstacles for them to move forward. She clearly determined that Miss Jian Shui'er was just unlucky to encounter such a rare scene in the Federation. These armed forces weren't targeting her. The forces that had the ability and courage to arrange assassinations in the civilian areas of the Federation should be very clear that Jian Shui'er had an extremely powerful figure behind her. Killing Jian Shui'er wouldn't benefit those forces at all. At that time, elder sister Tong immediately determined that this assassination should be targeted at the young man in the VIP box. Although the young master of the Tai family had never met the young miss before, out of courtesy, he still sent her flowers before the concert this time. Elder sister Tong believed in the strength of the Tai family. Since they were clearing the path in front, then this path should be the safest. She didn't know what other dangers were hidden at the other exits of the stadium. However, she didn't expect that the forces that wanted to kill the young master of the Tai family would actually hide a mecha in the underground parking lot. When the sound of the mecha firing at full power and the sound of the main cannon firing rang out, the lower level of the stadium shook. Jian Shui'er and elder sister Tong were already in the passageway of the underground parking lot. The gunshots stopped abruptly, and there was a deathly silence. In front of them was darkness. The door through the parking lot was half open, and the air was filled with the smell of blood and burnt flesh. Water splashed down from the ceiling. It was silent. They didn't know if there were still people alive, and if there were any dangers ahead. "Miss, please wait." A cold light flashed through elder sister Tong's eyes as she prepared to force her way through. Jian Shui'er looked at her worriedly and pulled on her sleeve lightly. Right at this moment, they heard a voice. "Don't come over." Then they saw a figure suddenly jump up and rush out of the door. They didn't notice that there was actually a living person underneath the corpse. Right after that, gunshots rang out from outside the door. Flames flashed, blue electric arcs sizzled, and screams sounded continuously. Everything happened in a very short period of time and then stopped. At that time, he hid very well under that corpse. The position he chose was also not bad. If he wasn't worried about our safety, he wouldn't have shouted that and exposed his position, putting himself in danger. In the ward, Jian Shui'er quietly looked at Su Li's distorted face in his sleep as she thought to herself. Perhaps it was because of this reason that she felt that she owed him something. That was why she asked elder sister Tong to help and save this unknown person. At the same time, she also asked her relatives who didn't want to contact them to send this person to the 1st Military General Hospital overnight for emergency treatment. In fact, Jian Shui'er didn't know who this unconscious young man was. She didn't even know if he was a member of the Tai family's security or an assassin. She just saved his life as repayment for that shout. At that time was of the essence. Before she knew the identity of this person, she didn't want to hand this seriously injured person over to the government or the Tai family. His name is Su Lu, a student of Yue University. That day, he happened to be with Tai Ziyuan to watch your concert. Elder sister Tong said calmly, to be able to sit in the same room as Tai Ziyuan, it seems that this person has a close relationship with the Tai family. Although I was against Mrs.'s decision at that time, it seems that it's not bad. After all, the relationship between the old man and that lady has always been good. I only found out today that the Tai family spent a lot of effort to find this person. Elder sister Tong frowned and said, but he was wearing the uniform of the 4th Military Region. This is really puzzling. What does the Tai family have to do with me? As for the 4th Military Region, I don't understand, Jian Shui'er smiled and said, but it's good to know who this person is. I have already notified the Tai family. I believe that they will send someone to pick him up soon. Elder sister Tong looked at the unconscious Su Lu and smiled. She thought that Miss still didn't want to hear anything related to the old man. The second type of connection has been established. The information node has been recaptured. Establishing the observation system and reserving the data transmission channel. Reporting. 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 Group of 5. The central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation in the outskirts of the capital city recorded these words in its program. Out of the expectations of all the staff, that so-called error in the cloud computing domain was successfully fixed in just one day. What was strange was that even the Federal Central Computer in the depths of the Bureau of Proclamation was suspicious of this program setting, because the Group of 5 had been dead for tens of thousands of years. The level of the mechanical life signs had caused a gap to appear in the light of the first charter. And the chip on the back of Su Li's neck was in this gap. Lying unconscious in the hospital bed, he didn't know that he had just inexplicably passed the most dangerous juncture of his life. He was still dreaming about mechas and idols. Chapter 132. My name is Su Lu. His voice was a little hoarse. He didn't know if it was because he hadn't rehydrated for a few days, or because he had injured his vocal cords during the fight in the parking lot, or because he felt nervous from the bottom of his bones when he saw the Federation idol in front of him. Jian Shui'er's unkempt purple hair had already been combed very neatly and was casually tied into a braid. However, because her hair was too short, the braid appeared very short and bounced behind her head. It was very cute and appeared much more youthful than her previous appearance. My name is Jian Shui'er, she said to the young man on the bed with a smile. Su Lu couldn't help but laugh out loud. He felt that this answer was very clever. Life was full of imagination, but who would have thought that Jian Shui'er would personally introduce herself as Jian Shui'er? Among the tens of billions of citizens of the Federation, the number of people who didn't recognize Jian Shui'er's cute face was definitely much less than the number of people who didn't recognize President Sig. His laughter stopped abruptly because it affected the injuries all over his body. Su Lu felt pain. So it was Jian Shui'er's turn to laugh embarrassedly because she knew very well why this guy named Su Lu was laughing. And indeed, she hadn't introduced herself in a long time, except for when she was a guest presenter at the Nebula Awards. But for some reason, after hearing the other person's self-introduction, she subconsciously responded. After the laughter, there was silence. When Su Lu woke up, Sister Tong just happened to leave the ward to make an important call. So the first person he saw was this little girl with purple hair again. This time, he was very sure that this wasn't a dream, but that she really appeared in front of him. He became very nervous, and somewhat confused. He listened to the other person describe what happened after he fainted. Enterprise, forward. Hearing the words that came out of Jian Shui'er's mouth, Sula thought of something else. The lips of the Federation idol in the TV series said that classic line, and they were talking about something related to him. In the slightly awkward atmosphere, Jian Shui'er smiled and looked at the young man who had just woken up with interest. Until just now, she didn't know the other party's name and background because other than the government, even the 1st Military Region's General Hospital didn't have the authority to scan any citizen's file. If it was just to avoid the reporters, other than this hospital that was filled with the smell of medicine, Jian Shui'er actually had many other places to go. However, she would take the time to come to the hospital these few days. She thought that the other party had fallen into a dangerous situation of life and death in order to protect her. And for some reason, when she was with this young man, her mood would become much calmer. The unconscious young man seemed to have a soothing effect. For the next few days, Jian Shui'er would fall asleep under the sun. Occasionally, she would quietly look at his ordinary face. Because she was sure that he would not wake up, the more she looked at him, the more familiar he seemed. However, now that the other party had woken up, Jian Shui'er naturally wouldn't stare at his face anymore. But under that cute smiling face, she couldn't help but recall that day in the dark underground parking lot, that determined and brave figure, and the thrilling battle that followed. During the battle, Su Li's toughness and swiftness left a deep impression on Jian Shui'er. Although she had met many strong people in the military, she had always hated those people. But for some reason, she didn't hate Su Li's aura. Su Li was a person who didn't like to talk much. Unless it was necessary, he would rather choose to be silent. He would learn in silence, practice in silence, and fight in silence. Only in front of the people closest to him would he speak more. For example, in front of the uncle, Zhang Xiameng, Shi Qinghai, Tai Ziyuan, and Li Wei. Especially in front of his idol, who had only appeared in his dreams, he didn't know what to say. The two young men and women, who had always been very distant from each other, sat next to each other in this awkward silence. At this moment, the countless kilometers between the Eastwood District's mining pit and the capital ring disappeared. Even the distance that required 4 minutes and 12 seconds to transmit a message disappeared. In the end, it was Su Li who broke the silence. He looked at Jian Shui'er's beautiful face and said with a hoarse voice, "Thank you for saving my life. If there's anything you need from me in the future, please don't hesitate to ask." This sentence sounded a little awkward. It sounded too much like the Jianghu tone in the movies. But Su Li said it from the bottom of his heart. Everyone was used to adding more beauty to their idols, not to mention that Jian Shui'er had really saved his life. He said it with utmost sincerity and seriousness. Jian Shui'er could also hear the sincerity in his words. After being stunned for a moment, a faint blush appeared on her cheeks. She looked beautiful because she always felt that it was him who had saved her. Su Li didn't notice this, but he thought about how he had been unconscious for so long. The few people in Linhai who cared about him must have been worried sick. A hint of anxiety appeared between his brows. Jian Shui'er could tell what he was thinking. She smiled and said, "Do you want to inform your friends?" "Don't worry, we've already informed the Tai family." Su Li smiled embarrassedly. His body still couldn't move. Only his smile was as sincere as it had been for the past 20 years. "I want to give a call to another friend." "Girlfriend?" Jian Shui'er asked curiously. "X." Su Li replied with some difficulty. "I'm trying to get rid of the word X." Su Li held a phone that wasn't small or delicate. Instead, it had a metallic feel to it. He didn't know that this was the Federation's newest generation of touchscreen phones. He only remembered from the slight warmth between his thumb and forefinger that Jian Shui'er had personally opened the phone and handed it to him. There was still the lingering warmth of Jian Shui'er's fingers on the metal surface. His heart skipped a beat, and he immediately scolded himself in his heart. When it came to relationships, he was a very honest guy. At least he believed that he had a girlfriend. And most importantly, Although he had dared to loudly proclaim that he wanted to marry Jian Shui'er under the green tree in the outskirts of Heshi, that was because he believed that Jian Shui'er would never appear in his life. Once she did appear, how could he have the slightest bit of wild ambition? Zhang Xiaoming's surprised voice came through the phone, followed by the sound of suppressed sobs. At this moment, there was no one else in Su Li's heart, not even Jian Shui'er. There was only the woman waiting for his news in Linhai. Yes, she was originally his woman, and she was a silly woman who liked him. Then, a complicated emotion appeared in his eyes, because he thought of something. After calling Zhang Xiaoming, he immediately called Mr. Shi. As Su Li dialed the number that he had memorized in his heart, he was slightly perplexed. It turned out that in this world, he only had a few people close to him. If he really died, wouldn't there be too few people crying at the cemetery? Or could it be that no one would prepare a funeral for him? This was a very bad feeling. When Shi Qinghai's call went through, but no one picked up, Su Li felt even more uneasy. He knew his rogue official friend very well. He had been missing for a few days, so he should have been waiting for his call. The door of the ward opened, and Sister Tong walked in. She looked at Su Li, who was lying on the bed with his eyes open, in surprise. The doctor has already come. He said that his injuries are too serious. He needs to talk less and not move, Jian Shui'er answered for Su Li with a smile. Sister Tong looked at her and said, "The Tai family is here. Miss, do you want to meet them?" "No, thanks." Jian Shui'er stood up and bowed slightly to Su Li, who was lying on the sickbed, saying, "Goodbye." Su Li was worried about Shi Qinghai, so he subconsciously nodded. He didn't notice Jian Shui'er's departure at all. Not long after, the door of the ward was pushed open, and a large group of doctors in white coats rushed in. In the middle of them was a person who looked like an official. The official walked to the bedside and bowed deeply to the surprised Su Li. He bowed more than 90 degrees and said solemnly, "The young master will arrive tomorrow." There was a big time difference between the state where the General Hospital of the 1st Military Region was located and Linhai State. While there was a show of a big family's Thanksgiving night in the ward, the streets of Linhai State had just woken up. People coming and going from various companies and government agencies were suddenly walking while eating breakfast. Shi Qinghai stood on the side of the street, lazily leaning against a phone booth, eating bread and lettuce. The red ketchup was like blood that was about to solidify, flowing out from the corners of his thin lips. He looked at the phone that kept ringing, and didn't want to answer it. When the persistent ringing stopped for a long time, he put the phone back into his coat pocket and continued to walk in the direction of Shuanghui Street. The number displayed on the phone was very strange. Although the number was arranged beautifully, like a piece of music, Shi Qinghai didn't have the habit of answering strange calls. Especially at this tense moment, any unnecessary contact might put him in an irreversible situation. In the early hours of the morning, the Federation's Investigation Bureau withdrew a certain investigation notice from its subordinate departments. Shi Qinghai inquired about it through his internal connections, and confirmed that Su Li had been found by the Tai family, and his life was not in danger. He was no longer worried about Su Li, but began to worry about himself and his teacher, who had been a spy in the Federation government for decades. In the last few days, Shi Qinghai had always felt that there was an invisible net around him, which was covering him from a very high altitude, and could fall down and trap him at any time. After careful observation, he confirmed that there were at least a few groups of targets monitoring him. Thinking about the secret phone call from his teacher that day, he knew that things were not good. The early hours of the morning were the easiest time for intelligence agents to relax. As an excellent intelligence agent, Shi Qinghai took the opportunity to get rid of the surveillance of his colleagues, and took the risk to go to Shuanghui Street. Linhai's HTD bureau was on Shuanghui Street. Shi Qinghai walked through the side alley next to the HTD bureau building, like a white-collar worker who suddenly went to work. Then he looked up in shock, and found that something heavy was falling from a high altitude. With a loud muffled sound, a car next to him was smashed flat. The person who fell from the top of the car was already dead. His white hair showed that he was not young, and the blood that kept dripping down was like diluted ketchup, which looked extremely disgusting. Shi Qinghai looked at that place in a daze, his eyes slightly squinted. The bread in his hand was already crushed, and the ketchup inside flowed out. Second, it means that the Federation's intelligence department is determined to make sure that there are no more spies in the country. Third, it is naturally recalling a good movie. Last time, when I wrote about Meeting on the Rooftop, the leader said that some readers missed this scene very much. Chapter 133. 15 minutes ago, in the director's office of Lin Hai's HTD bureau. The gray-haired director ended his recording and began to destroy the data in his computer. After a phone call last night, all the uneasiness he had for the past few days became reality. The director left his home, which had been closely monitored by the Federation's agents. As usual, he arrived at his office half an hour early and began to do what he was doing. His expression was very calm, and the wrinkles on his face were as meticulous as the striped tie on his neck. Since many years ago, when he became a member of the anti-government army, he knew that his life would end in this way. Whether it was as a psychology professor in the first military academy, or later when he was transferred to the Federation's department, he had always been mentally prepared for this. The director didn't know why he was being watched by the Federation's investigation bureau. The operation against him must be very confidential, because Shi Qinghai was in the 4th section, but no abnormalities were found. It seemed that Shi Qinghai was also in the surveillance area. After destroying all the call records in his computer, the director opened the safe, bent down with difficulty, and took out a stack of papers from the compartment. These papers recorded some codes and code names, which were the foundation of the entire network he was in charge of. In the current era of technology, anything recorded in a smart tool could at least be partially repaired afterwards. The anti-government army's spy network had always been very cautious in using this most primitive method of recording. After stuffing the papers into the shredder and putting the shredded papers in a wastebasket, the director walked into the attached bathroom of his office. After covering the smoke temperature sensor with a wet towel, he lit a lighter and began to burn the codes that were related to the lives of many people. After flushing the ashes into the water, the director let out a long sigh of relief. He secretly felt lucky that the Federation's investigation bureau officers had left him some time to deal with the aftermath, probably because they wanted to get more information. Walking back to his office, the director's thick fingers subconsciously played with the lighter, which was a 50th birthday gift from Shi Qinghai. He took a deep breath and took out his phone to look at the time. He confirmed that there were still a few minutes before his appointment with Shi Qinghai. That kid shouldn't have entered the cafe yet. Only then did he feel relieved. His clumsy fingers pressed a button on his phone. After encrypting a prepared recording, he uploaded it to a temporary file storage on the internet. The bureau chief turned around and quickly locked the thick office door. Then, he walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and carefully observed the gradually increasing number of pedestrians on Shuanghui Street and the quiet side alley under the window. She didn't know what he saw, but he calmly swallowed a pill, took out a pistol from the drawer, and pulled the trigger. After a few crisp sounds, a few small round holes appeared on the sturdy windproof French window, but the arrangement was somewhat inappropriate. The bureau chief shrugged. When he was training in the mountains, he always thought that marksmanship was not the most important thing. Now, it seemed that he was wrong. Panting, he lifted the heavy swivel chair and smashed it against the floor-to-ceiling glass. The swivel chair bounced back, but the glass window cracked to his delight. At this moment, there was the sound of someone pounding on the door. The bureau chief held the phone in his hand again. Looking at the glass window full of spiderweb-like cracks, he slammed his head into it. The door was forcibly smashed open by the agents. At the same time, the bureau chief's fat body broke through the glass and began to fall to the ground. The wind whistled. The bureau chief in the air saw his subordinates eating breakfast downstairs and couldn't help but laugh. Then, he died at the intersection of Shuanghui Street and the side alley. There were screams and screams. In the early morning, no matter who saw such a tragedy, seeing the deformed body and the spurting blood, they would be too disgusted and scared to say anything. Shi Qinghai tightly held the sandwich bread in his hand and walked into the crowd unobtrusively. He stared at the bureau chief's white hair, and his face quickly turned pale. His face was not much different from the people around him. On the ground not far from the car, there was a smashed mobile phone, which was difficult to put together in a short time. Snow white, blood red. Shi Qinghai's eyes widened, as if he couldn't stand the contrast of bright colors, and blinked. The snow in Linhai had stopped today, but people were still used to wearing windbreakers with snow caps. He was no exception. He was like a pedestrian occupied by fear and disgust. He lifted the snow cap to cover his face and walked quickly, but not too quickly, through the main entrance of the HTD Bureau building, and walked into the distance. Shortly after he left, 7 or 8 agents from the Capital Federation Bureau of Investigation rushed out of the building, rushed to the car, and began to anxiously call for something through the communication device. This is a pre-recorded recording. If you can hear this recording, it means that you haven't been exposed, or you haven't been caught by the government. All of my communication devices have been monitored, so I can only use this last method to talk to you. I once contacted Deputy Minister Yang Jingsong of the Ministry of National Defense. I wanted to use our old friendship to try to get some information from him. But not long ago, he died, and I seem to have been exposed. My contact with Deputy Minister Yang has always been within the scope of contact between a dean and a professor. He was also a top anti-Green Dragon Mountain soldier. So I don't understand why his death would expose me. Yang Jingsong's death should be related to the Linhai Gymnasium incident. If someone wants to connect that incident to the organization, then the contact between Yang Jingsong and me is the best way. You are the person who has the closest contact with me, and you know Su Le, so you should be part of this plan. I can confirm that there is a traitor in the upper management of the organization. From now on, you can't trust anyone except him. If you are exposed, you can try to find someone in Harbor City. That person's address is on the side of a quiet street in Linhai, under a cold birch tree. There was a small phone booth covered in thin snow. In the phone booth, Shi Qinghai carefully listened to the last words the director left for him. He fell into silence, and his eyes became wet. He walked out of the phone booth, raised the cold sandwich bread in his hand, and took a bite. The sweet and sour ketchup made his stomach twitch, and he almost vomited. He threw the bread into the trash and waved his hand to call for a taxi. Dozens of minutes later, the taxi passed by the Linhai Field Office building. Shi Qinghai looked through the glass at the strange silence on the floor where the 4 departments were located, and his beautiful peach blossom eyes gradually narrowed. He smiled at the driver in the lower row and said, "Brother, how much would it cost to rent a car to go to Shangye?" A line of cars stopped on the tarmac of the Linhai airport. Tai Ziyuan, wearing a brown windbreaker, walked out of a brand new black car without a logo. His face was as pale as usual. He stared at the document in his hand, and a trace of anger gradually appeared in his paleness. He hurriedly read the document in the car, but it successfully destroyed his calmness. Tai Ziyuan angrily threw the document into the snow, and said to Butler Jean, "What bullshit is this?" Yang Jingsong, the director of the HTD Bureau, and then Shi Qinghai. What are those useless people in the government trying to do? Are they trying to tell me that the soldiers who did the assassination got the information from Shi Qinghai? Butler Jean quickly followed his footsteps and whispered beside him, "The evidence is conclusive." The Federation Investigation Bureau found records of frequent calls between Deputy Director Yang and the director of the HTD Bureau. Although it didn't involve the stadium incident, who knows if they have any other methods of communication. Tai Ziyuan suddenly stopped in his tracks, looked at Butler Jean and said, "You believe this so-called evidence?" Butler Jean was silent for a moment, and then shook his head. "Deputy Director Yang, the director, Shi Qinghai, Su Le. It does point to a certain possibility, but the problem is that this evidence chain is too weak. Not only is it weak, there's no evidence at all, so where did the chain come from?" A rare sneer appeared at the corner of Li Ziyuan's lips. Some people are just trying every possible means to link this matter to the anti-government army. At least now we have evidence to prove that the director of the HTD Bureau, who used to be a professor at First People's Hospital, was Shi Qinghai's teacher when he was at First People's Hospital, and these two people are spies for the anti-government forces. We've known for a long time that Shi Qinghai is a member of the anti-government forces. Tai Ziyuan calmly looked at Butler Jean, and the government doesn't know. Since that's the case, the problem must lie with the director of the HTD Bureau. Some people know his identity, and he can link Yang Jingsong and those tough soldiers to Shi Qinghai, Su Lu, and me. I don't care if there's something wrong with the anti-government forces. Tai Ziyuan stared at Butler Jean and said, I only know that some people are trying to take advantage of the fact that I almost died to stir up trouble. I won't allow anyone to break the agreement between Mr. Pabre and Green Dragon Mountain. Tai Ziyuan emphasized, I don't want those dogs of the investigation bureau to look at my friend Su Lu with suspicion. Shi Qinghai can't die, at least not now. Since the Federation has started to arrest him, think of a way to help him. There's very little we can do in this regard, Butler Jean insisted. And the Federation government is only responsible for providing a logical answer. As long as Madam can't question the reasonableness of this result, we can only accept it. The 12 special agents of the Special Task Force only found out about young Master's destination that day. Even if the spy among them was able to send out information, it's impossible for the soldiers to be prepared in the middle of the night. Butler Jean continued calmly, the internal investigation of the family has also been completed, and there are no suspicious points. From the looks of it, the only suspicious point is that Mr. Su Lu might have told his friends about his whereabouts. I'm very sorry, I didn't specifically instruct Mr. Su Lu on this matter beforehand, and made a mistake. Tai Ziyuan frowned slightly. After a long silence, he said, it can't be Shi Qinghai. No matter how much the anti-government forces want me dead, they wouldn't do it now. It's just like how I hope that they all disappear, but I wouldn't push the Federation to send troops to Green Dragon Mountain at this time either. Tai Ziyuan tightened the scarf around his neck in the wind and snow stirred up by the airflow of the plane. He walked up the gangway and stepped on the journey to visit Su Lu, and said his last words. Although Su Lu doesn't have many friends, Shi Qinghai isn't the only one. Chapter 134. The Black Tie family's private commercial jet left the runway in the wind and snow. It rose into the cloudy sky and soon disappeared into the horizon, heading towards the Federation's first military district general hospital in the southwest region of Jingzhou. The Tai family staff on the tarmac watched as the young master and his direct subordinates disappeared. Only then did they let out a sigh of relief. On the first day of the new year, the young master was assassinated. The tense atmosphere that had persisted since then finally became a little more relaxed as the jet left. Only then did a middle-aged female staff member dare to come forward. She bent down and picked up the documents that Tai Ziyuan had angrily thrown away. Tai Ziyuan had the right and reason to be angry, but these staff members couldn't let any of these internal documents leak out. In an empty ward, Su Lu, who had slept for too many days, was still weak, but he didn't feel sleepy at all. The TV in the room was on, and commercials were playing. He felt a little bored. Shi Qinghai hadn't been contacted yet, and Zhang Xiaomeng couldn't possibly come over. The Tai family members were all outside the ward at this time, so no one came to disturb his rest. He casually picked up a few pieces of paper from his waist and began to read them. Who knew that he couldn't move his eyes away after reading them? These were the things that Miss Jian Shuier had unintentionally left behind in the ward. Looking at the questions, it seemed like they were mock questions for the joint university entrance examination. Su Lu calculated her age in his mind. Jian Shuier should be 17 years old today, which was the time when the Federation's general education ended. But he had never thought that the national idol of the Federation would have to study hard like a normal person, and then participate in the joint university entrance examination. With Jian Shuiyer's current fame and wealth, it should be enough for her to live a happy and lazy life, right? Although Su Lu had never participated in the joint university entrance examination, he had prepared for a long time for the National Defense Officer examination. He could easily tell that this was a comprehensive examination paper. Su Lu had only read a lot of information about political and economic history in the library. He hadn't studied it systematically, so he didn't know whether the answers to the questions on the test paper were right or wrong. However, he was very good at mathematics and practical physics. Looking at the questions on paper B, he was surprised to find that Jian Shui's answers were not wrong. More importantly, the problem-solving process and train of thought written beside the questions were so clear. When he flipped to the last page of the paper, Sulu was stunned and scratched his head with his left hand. Only now did he know that Jian Shui was preparing to apply for the first military academy. Command faculty. However, there was a piece of paper under the test paper. The paper was a design diagram. The paper required the examinee to find a few mistakes in the design. The paper under the question was blank. Sulu looked at this question. His professional habits kicked in again, and he began to seriously reconnect all sorts of virtual pipelines in his mind. Looks like you're in good spirits. Spacing out, Sulu did not hear the heavy footsteps in the corridor earlier. Only when Tai Ziyuan pushed open the door and entered did he notice his arrival. Butler Jean took the coat Tai Ziyuan had taken off and bowed sincerely and gratefully towards Sulu on the sickbed. Then, he retreated out of the room and closed the door, leaving the two young men who had just gone through thick and thin together. Only his left arm can still move, said Sulu with a smile as he turned his head with some difficulty to glance at Tai Ziyuan. After being attacked by a military mecha, Sulu had only survived. Moreover, seeing that the fellow he had saved was also unscathed, he felt a trace of relief. Tai Ziyuan looked calmly at Sulu on the bed, his thoughts unreadable. After a while, he suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Saying thank you is indeed a very tacky thing to do, but this thank you still needs to be said." "Thank you." Sulu smiled, but did not say anything. "But your luck is not bad, to actually be saved by Jian Shui in such a desperate situation." Tai Ziyuan smiled and said, "Since she's your idol, did you take the opportunity to ask for an autograph or something?" Sulu was taken aback, and then said regretfully, "How could I forget about that?" Tai Ziyuan had rushed directly from Linhai to Jingzhou's Southwestern General Hospital without rest. The long flight had made his face increasingly pale. Under Su Li's persuasion, the two of them chatted for a while, and then Tai Ziyuan left the ward. The hospital had probably already arranged a room for him to rest in. The ward fell silent once more. Sulu stared silently at the ceiling, and could not help but laugh bitterly. He thought to himself, Tai Ziyuan's small frame looks even worse than my heavily injured self. Who in the world is visiting whom now? However, he also knew that with Tai Ziyuan's status, he had rushed here as soon as he found out about his whereabouts. Of course, it was not just to visit him, but more so because he wanted to express some kind of attitude. Although that kind of attitude was not explicitly stated, it was probably nothing more than the kind of gratitude shown in movies that one would definitely repay in the future. What made Su Li's feelings even more complicated was that from Tai Ziyuan's mouth, he roughly understood some of the truth behind the assassination at Linhai Gymnasium. Although Tai Ziyuan did not completely explain it, he also knew that this matter might have something to do with the federal military. The Tai family seemed to support Councillor Pabre. At this time, Sulu had no idea that Councillor Pabre's trip to Green Dragon Mountain actually had a lot to do with him. All of the tremors originated from the Double Moon Festival Ball. The ward fell silent once more. Sulu closed his eyes to rest for a while, but in the end, he could not fall asleep, so he turned up the volume of the television. At this time, the endless advertisements on the Federation News channel finally ended. The news anchor who had reported the good news to the citizens of the entire Federation on New Year's Eve once again appeared on the screen. The news anchor's expression was calm, and he spoke quickly. Today, Councillor Macklin made a statement after attending the completion ceremony of a certain large-scale radio astronomy center in Jingzhou. The image of the Jingzhou government office building appeared on the screen. In front of the building, an old man with white hair and plain clothes was saying something in front of the news station. Beside him was an official who looked to be about 40 years old. His eyebrows and eyes were deeply set, and he looked very charismatic. Sulu looked at the screen and thought to himself, this old man is Councillor Macklin, who served Xiaoming. For some reason, a sense of disgust welled up in his heart. Although he had always been emotionally inclined towards the anti-government forces in the four states and the mountains, and knew that Councillor Macklin had greatly promoted the reconciliation between the two sides in the Federation over the years by upholding the principle of non-violence. However, when he thought of Zhang Xiameng, Su Li's brows furrowed. Through the introduction of the voiceover, Su Li knew that the middle-aged official beside Councillor Macklin was the governor of Jingzhou. For some reason, His Excellency the Governor actually issued this statement together with Councillor Macklin, and expressed his extremely clear support for him. Senator Macklin's statement vaguely pointed out that there was an undercurrent surging within the seemingly peaceful Federation. Some of the hawkish elements in the military were, or had already been, attempting to interfere with the peace process between the federal government and the four states surrounding the mountains. Councillor Macklin strongly condemned these actions and angrily said that Councillor Pabre had just reached a preliminary reconciliation agreement with the anti-government forces in Green Dragon Mountain. When the councillor was about to return to the capital special district, any despicable and dirty means could only be interpreted as a challenge to the collective will of all the peace-loving citizens of the Federation. Immediately after that, the governor of Jingzhou also made a speech. He strongly praised the conscience of Councillor Macklin and Councillor Pabre, and severely criticized the shameless actions of some people in the Federation government. Su Li didn't know who the governor of Jingzhou was. With the social class he had grown up in, the information he had come into contact with was not enough for him to determine what was wrong with the upper echelons of politics from just one piece of news. However, he still felt that something was amiss. He was not a stupid person. In fact, he could even be said to be a very smart person. His eyebrows gradually furrowed as he thought of the assassination attempt in the gymnasium. He probably couldn't get any more information from Tai Ziyuan. Su Li was silent for a moment. He took out the phone that the Tai family staff had prepared for him from beside his pillow and dialed Shi Qinghai's number. However, this time, not only did no one pick up, he even heard the sound of the phone being turned off. Su Li's heart began to feel uneasy. He felt that something was happening, and it was something bad. He didn't understand why a small fry like himself would be involved in these things. He only hoped that it didn't have anything to do with the fake chip behind his neck. A burst of pain pulled him back from his thoughts. He furrowed his eyebrows and didn't make a sound. Although the bones in his right thigh were completely shattered and there were several gunshot wounds on his body, which were not something an ordinary person could endure, he wasn't an ordinary person. He wasn't an ordinary person, and he didn't have the intention to torture himself. Using the finger of his left hand to gently push the switch of the electronic anesthesia pump, Su Li calmly lay on the bed, waiting for sleep to come. While waiting, he subconsciously picked up the last piece of paper on Jian Shuiyer's test paper again. He wanted to use the solution to that difficult problem to distract himself and help him fall asleep. The effects of the drug slowly appeared. Su Li felt that his eyelids were getting heavier and heavier. The drawing on the paper in front of him was also getting more and more blurry. One drawing became two, sometimes overlapping, sometimes separating, and sometimes floating around. But why did the drawing in front of him and the drawing on the paper look so different? A trace of doubt flashed through Su Li's heart. The one closer to him, it seemed that some parts of it had already been changed. Yes, this change was very reasonable, this change was very unreasonable. There was no reason for this crystal tube to be placed on this circuit at all. Chapter 135. The effect of the drug gradually faded away. Su Li finally no longer felt drowsy. He stared at the white paper with an extremely cautious and nervous expression on his face. He didn't know how much time had passed, but he could clearly feel the sharp pain coming from his thigh. But he still couldn't get rid of the phantom in front of him, the structure diagram that was so close that it occupied about 1/5 of his field of vision. The lines on the diagram were very clear, and it didn't seem like a supernatural phenomenon that appeared in the air. What was even stranger was that after looking at it for a long time, Su Li had already confirmed that some of the designs on the structure diagram could help him solve the question left by Jian Shuier. Although Su Li had some reference materials or books, He believed that he could find the mistakes in the structure diagram in the original question within 10 minutes, and increase the power output to the level required by the question. But it was definitely not as direct, as simple, as incredible as this. Where did this structure diagram come from? Why did it appear in front of him? If it were an ordinary person, perhaps they would have already gone crazy, but Su Li's nerves were indeed much thicker than the average person's. In that strange dark dream that he had already forgotten, he didn't go crazy, so naturally, he wouldn't go crazy now. He quietly, stubbornly stared at the diagram in front of him. After a long time, he stretched out his hand and waved it in front of his eyes. His palm moved closer to his eyes, until it was about to touch his eyelashes, but the diagram still didn't move, and it didn't disappear. Through this action, he finally confirmed one thing: this strange power structure diagram didn't appear in the light beam combination in the air, but appeared in his eyes. A blueprint had actually appeared in his eyes. No matter how strong Su Li's nerves were, at this time, he couldn't help but feel a buzzing sound in his head, and he was a little dazed. Was this an illusion or something else? Could it be that when he was in a coma, the hospital discovered the strange secret in his body, so they used him as a human guinea pig and put a miniature light screen on his retina? All kinds of strange thoughts flooded Su Li's mind, because he was facing the strangest fact at this time. He had already lost a lot of blood, and now his face was even paler. Lying on the hospital bed, he was silent for a long time. Then, he threw down the test paper in his hand and began to blink, close, and rub his eyes. He wanted to blow away the blueprint in his eyes, turn it off, and rub it off. He didn't know how much time had passed, but he finally gave up on this attempt. He dejectedly tilted his head and stopped thinking about this problem. It wasn't that he didn't want to think about it, but that he didn't dare to think about it. Any normal person would feel at a loss when they found something that shouldn't be in their eyes. Although Su Li's body had a very strange power, it was still something that he could vaguely grasp. Unlike now, he was really worried that he might have become some kind of robot monster. Strangely enough, he didn't know if it was because he didn't want to think about the blueprint anymore, or because he had closed his eyes for too long, but the blueprint that had always appeared in his eyes, even when he closed his eyes in the dark, actually disappeared. Su Li was shocked again. This time, he didn't dare to open his eyes. He just tried to calm his breathing and carefully waited. After a while, he confirmed that the blueprint in front of him had really disappeared. He let out a sigh of relief and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, but he still couldn't understand what had just happened. Su Li's complexion was slightly better. He silently lay on the hospital bed and looked at the snow-white ceiling. He didn't know what to think in his heart. The news on the TV was still broadcasting, but his heart was already in a mess. He didn't know how much time had passed, but he sorted out his thoughts and confirmed the condition of his body. He clenched his teeth and narrowed his eyes. Like a brave and determined soldier, he picked up the test paper again. The blueprint in the question appeared in front of his eyes again. Su Li didn't want to give up until he figured out whether it was an illusion or something else. He had always been the kind of guy that once he was interested in something, he would study it to the end. However, for many years in the past, he had been studying machines, but now he was studying his own eyes. There was a room not far from his ward. Tai Ziyuan, who was supposed to be resting, was now quietly watching the TV screen. He didn't expect that he would have to find out such important information through the news. His eyebrows gradually furrowed. Great reconciliation? A hint of mockery appeared at the corner of his lips. Jingzhou was the largest state in Region S1. Especially the state capital, Port City, was the undisputed largest city in the Federation for countless years. Jingzhou was the most economically developed region in the Federation. Since Region S1 was directly under the jurisdiction of the Federation government, there was no position for the chief executive of the administrative region. Therefore, the governor of Jingzhou, who had countless economic resources in his hands, had secretly become the highest-ranking chief executive of Region S1. According to historical convention, the position of the governor of Jingzhou in the Federation was only half a level lower than that of the chief executive of the various major galaxies. Of course, this was under the premise that the big shots in the capital special district were not taken into account. What made Tai Ziyuan even more alarmed was that he knew very well that Governor Ross's partners were the families of the 7 big families. Why would such a person suddenly stand on the stage and echo Macklin's words? What exactly did this governor, or rather, the families behind him, want to do? He's taking advantage of the situation. Butler Jean, who had been standing beside him all this time, sighed slightly worriedly. It seems that Governor Ross is determined to participate in the presidential election at the end of the year. There's only 1 year's time. Can he make it in time? Tai Ziyuan immediately understood the truth of the matter and said with a frown. Now, the entire Federation is jumping for joy because of the New Year's gift that Senator Pabre brought back. If the election were to be held now, Senator Pabre would be directly elected, Butler Jean said softly. The original few presidential candidates, because they have been unable to change their tough policies towards the 4 states surrounding the mountain region, have basically lost before the battle in the current public opinion environment. Under such circumstances, they can only invite someone who is clean, who has never expressed any opinion on this matter, and who has a certain level of experience and fame. Butler Jean continued, the governor of Jingzhou, Ross, is without a doubt the best candidate. This governor has always been very cautious and has never expressed any extreme opinions. Now it seems that he has been very interested in the position of president for a long time. The key is still Macklin. Tai Ziyuan quietly looked at the white-haired old man on the holographic screen and said softly, if the other party really takes a risky step and makes Macklin a candidate for vice president after Ross announces his candidacy, Macklin was just elected as a member of the Federation last year. After all, he's from the 4 states surrounding the mountain region, and now he's sitting on the anti-government military committee. Those families can't be so bold, right? Boldness is all forced out of you. Tai Ziyuan lowered his head and said somewhat tiredly, we've successfully created a political environment of great reconciliation with that guy from Green Dragon Mountain. In this presidential election, whoever wants to participate will have to work hard in this environment. The only one who can make a fuss about reconciliation with Senator Pabre is Macklin. If Macklin's story is publicized by those people, it'll be another legend. Tai Ziyuan's lips curved slightly and said mockingly, an anti-government old man has become the vice president of the Federation. What other situation could better reflect the great reconciliation of the Federation than this arrangement? At this moment, the sound of footsteps faintly came from outside the well-soundproofed door. Tai Ziyuan's train of thought was interrupted, and he frowned slightly. After Butler Jean pushed open the door and took a look, he turned around and said softly, I think there's something wrong with Su Li's side. Tai Ziyuan was slightly stunned. When he first came to the hospital, the director assured him that Su Li was fine. He was just severely injured and needed a lot of time to recover. How could there be another problem after just a few hours? He felt slightly nervous. He put on a set of pajamas and walked towards Su Li's room. At this moment, several specialists from the general hospital had already arrived in Su Li's room, and all kinds of equipment had been moved over. This patient was first sent here by Jian Shuya herself, and then a young influential person came to visit. Although no one in the 1st Military Region General Hospital knew about Jian Shuya's background and Tai Ziyuan's true identity, except for the director himself, all the medical staff on the entire floor became nervous when the bell rang in Su Li's room. Apart from the lines, do you see anything else? A specialist's warm voice came from the room. No. Su Li's slightly tired and frustrated voice answered him. When Su Li stared at the question again, the strange structure diagram appeared in front of him again. The second appearance convinced him that this was not an illusion, but something that had really happened. Thus, he pressed the emergency bell. Although he knew that there were some secrets in his body that could not be exposed to the public, he was still willing to trust the doctor when faced with such a strange situation. However, he was very careful not to say that what he saw was a structure diagram. Instead, he said that it was a series of very regular and very complicated lines. How many times has this phenomenon appeared? Twice. A specialist walked out of the room and saw Tai Ziyuan in his pajamas. Before the specialist could ask, he said, according to the preliminary analysis, it should be a hallucination. Is it serious? Tai Xuan said worriedly. If Sulu left behind some lifelong sequelae in order to save him, he would feel very uncomfortable. It shouldn't be serious. About 12% of patients will have this kind of symptoms after a long period of coma. The next morning, the data from the examination of various instruments was gathered into the final diagnosis. A specialist walked out of the room with a serious expression and said to the pale Sulu, "Young man, are you mentally prepared?" Sulu did not look at the question again that night. He forced himself to sleep under the influence of the anesthetic pump. Until now, he looked at the doctor with a forced smile and said, "Please go ahead." There are many reasons for the formation of a hallucination, but after you fell asleep yesterday, we conducted a medical observation and found that there is an abnormal discharge phenomenon in a certain area of your brain. Now it seems that it is this discharge phenomenon that caused the hallucination. To be precise, the lines you saw in your eyes did not really appear in your eyes, but there is an abnormal electrical wave activity in the relevant area of your brain. Sulu listened in a daze. He did not pay attention to what the doctor said and asked, "What kind of disease is this?" Chapter 136. Hearing the word epilepsy, Suli's face turned pale. He didn't know the specific cause of epilepsy or the profound medical principles behind it, but he knew that this disease was often referred to as epilepsy or convulsion by ordinary people. No matter how optimistic, cheerful, and positive a young person was, if they knew that they had such a disease, the word pessimistic would be written on their forehead in an instant. Being sick was not scary. Even if he was terminally ill or had a broken leg, he would not be defeated by Sulu, who was as stubborn as a rock. Only this kind of disease that could cause his whole body to convulse, foam at the mouth, and slanted ears and mouth at any time made him feel a chill. If he had liver cancer, he would hold his stomach and endure the pain and enjoy the soybean-sized beads of sweat on his forehead. That would be a heroic and cool death. But if he had to constantly worry that he might become a fool at any time and keep convulsing on the floor, even if he could live like a normal person, this kind of living was too unsightly. "Are you sure that I have epilepsy?" Sulu asked in a hoarse voice as she looked at the specialist doctor beside her with a hopeful expression. "The possibility is very high, at least more than 90%. The expert had seen many patients in his life, so naturally, he didn't take epilepsy to heart. He said calmly, "After you fell asleep last night, the electroencephalogram and the EEG signal sent back by the electrodes confirmed that, in this area of your brain, every once in a while, the neurons will have an abnormal discharge phenomenon." The expert pointed at a certain area of the brain imaging and said seriously, "The discharge rate of the cortical pyramidal cells of a normal person's brain is less than 10 times per second. But last night, we measured that the discharge rate of the neurons in this area of your brain is often more than 100 times per second, and the peak number is as high as 566 times per second. So, we determined that this area is the focus of the disease." Sulu still didn't want to give up and asked, "Is there no other disease that can cause abnormal discharge of the neurons in the brain? Like being stimulated by something, or being in a long-term coma, the neurons in the brain have just woken up and are not used to it." In fact, when Sulu heard the term neurons, although he was a little unfamiliar with it, he thought of the strange power in his body and secretly worried. Of course, there could be other reasons that cause the abnormal discharge of cortical neurons, but after our analysis, we believe that epilepsy should be the most likely cause. When the specialist heard Suli's words, he couldn't help but smile. He thought that this patient was really good at finding strange excuses for himself. He emphasized, especially in the latter half of the night, when you entered deep sleep. With the abnormal electrical discharge of your brain, your muscles began to spasm intermittently. This is a typical symptom of epilepsy. I admit that what you said earlier may trigger abnormal discharges of cortical neurons in the brain. The expert looked at him with a comforting expression. But, this is also known as epilepsy. However, you don't have to worry. According to the results of the examination and the extent of your spasms, this shouldn't be a source of epilepsy, so the danger isn't great. If I manage my life and emotions well, it might be difficult for me to relapse in the future. Of course, even if I relapse, as long as I have someone by my side at all times and I don't sleep in a high bed at night, there shouldn't be any danger. The vast majority of epilepsy patients will only have some minor problems in their lives. At least from the current statistics, the lifespan of epilepsy patients will not be affected in any way. There's no need for surgery. No, unless you want to take the risk of becoming an idiot to help our hospital earn a large sum of money from the Federation's Citizen Medical Fund. After the specialist left, Sulu lay alone in the quiet ward. His left hand, the only thing he could move, unconsciously touched his head. It was hard to believe that his brain was damaged. Could it be the aftereffects of the battle in the underground parking lot? Could it be that the rebounding force of the mecha's strong body had injured his brain? Or could it be, he suddenly thought of the moment before he fainted, the intense pain brought by the mysterious power in his body, especially that feeling like an electric current had passed through the back of his neck and turned into countless thin needles, pricking his brain endlessly. There was no need for surgery, only medication. The key was still to have enough rest, adjust his mentality, and maintain an optimistic mood. The doctor's casual and calm instructions were actually meant to comfort the patient. Of course, if Sulu had an incurable disease, the doctor would probably have said something similar. Fortunately, Sulu was indeed a very optimistic person, and he easily shook off the gray emotions from before. Although the comforting words were actually not very useful, not having surgery on the brain was still something worth celebrating. The mobile phone was bought by the Thai family's staff, and it was even an old model. Sulu knew how the other party was able to do this, but thinking about it, Samlin Communications headquarters should not make things difficult for the Thai family. Sulu pulled out the display embedded in the metal body of the mobile phone, and felt that it was very smooth, and his mood improved. He began to go online silently, looking up some epilepsy-related information. The more he looked at it, the more silent he became. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that he really did have epilepsy. He threw the mobile phone beside his pillow, closed his eyes, and thought for a long time. He probably had secondary epilepsy, and the probability of passing it on to his offspring was only 4 times higher than normal people. The Federation's laws did not prohibit epilepsy patients from marrying and having children. Zhang Xiaomeng wouldn't have any objections, right? But he felt that he had to bring more towels with him in the future, or else who would help him wipe the white foam that he was spitting out? According to the information on the internet, when epilepsy patients had intermittent spasms, they had to be careful not to let the patient bite their tongue. Did he have to buy a few hard plastic bones for his pet dog to play with? But raising a pet dog required special approval from the HTD Bureau. Oh, right, he only needed to buy plastic bones, he did not need to raise a dog, and he was not a dog. Thinking about it like this, Sula felt more and more sad. If his life became like this in the future, it would be too far from his ideal life. He silently laid on the bed, his eyes fixed on the white ceiling, showing a hint of depression. So when Tai Ziyuan sat by his bed, had finished peeling an apple, and directly handed it to him, he noticed. This is a necessary procedure for visiting a patient, but it's a pity. In novels or movies, the person who peels an apple and feeds it bite by bite should be a beautiful and gentle girl. Su Le took the apple, took a big bite, stared at the window, and said, "If only Xiaomeng were here right now." Hearing Zhang Xiaomeng's name, Tai Ziyuan's eyes slightly narrowed. He smiled, but did not say anything to the girl, and said, "You've suddenly become more talkative today." Su Le was slightly stunned, and also felt the change in himself. It probably had nothing to do with escaping death, it was purely because of the shock he received from the doctor today. Tai Ziyuan already knew about his illness. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said with a smile, "Epilepsy is not a life-threatening illness. It's rare to see you so depressed, I'm not used to it." In the eyes of the friends around him, Su Le was always the ordinary, down-to-earth, smiling guy. It was rare to see him sigh. Su Le frowned slightly and sighed, "This illness is too troublesome, and it's too ugly when it flares up. I've prepared some medicine for you, a new drug. But don't worry, it has already passed the clinical examination." It's just that because it's too expensive, it hasn't been registered in the medical system. After a long silence, Tai Ziyuan took out a medicine bottle from his pocket and handed it to Su Lu. Don't be too agitated in the future. Also, before you leave the hospital, install a mini brainwave monitor. If you find anything wrong, take a pill. Su Lu took the medicine bottle and silently looked at the label. Sure enough, there was no sign of the Federation Medical Administration Bureau. He looked at the precautions, tilted his head slightly, and looked at Tai Ziyuan in confusion and said, "Tranquilizers? I often take them." Tai Ziyuan smiled and patted him on the shoulder, and said apologetically, "I still have some things to do, and I'm leaving Jingzhou tonight. I'll leave some people with you. If you need anything, just ask them. Also, I'll come to see you again in a few days." Su Lu nodded, and had no intention of asking him to stay. Although he saved Tai Ziyuan's life, he also knew that Tai Ziyuan was a high and mighty figure in society, and presumably a very busy guy. It was enough that Tai Ziyuan personally came to visit him in the hospital. "My private phone number is the first number on your phone. If you need anything, you can call me." Tai Ziyuan and Su Lu had met many days ago in the H1 area of Yue University. It was only now that Su Lu got his private phone number for the first time. After Tai Ziyuan left, Su Lu received a few more days of conservative treatment and monitoring in the 1st Military Region's General Hospital. Those highly skilled specialists and professors finally confirmed that Su Lu was probably hit by some external force during that incident. The damage to his brain caused damage to the neurons in his cerebral cortex, and caused abnormal discharge, which led to epilepsy. Just as the specialist said, there was no easy way to treat epilepsy, and the focus of the General Hospital's treatment was still on Su Li's severely injured body. The comminuted fracture on his right thigh, and the several gunshot wounds on his body were actually much more serious than the so-called epilepsy. After listening to several consultation plans, only then did Su Lu know that he had suffered such serious injuries in the stadium's underground parking lot. If he hadn't put on a bulletproof helmet and vest when he left the VIP room, his life would have been lost in that dark and damp space. Thinking of this, Su Lu couldn't help but feel a little scared. He didn't understand why he was always so hot-blooded and impulsive. Of course, he was willing to save Tai Ziyuan, but almost losing his life was not his intention. At the same time, what made him feel alarmed was that his eyes started to hallucinate again. However, this time, it wasn't the power structure diagram, but a very familiar image of the mine pit. Su Lu began to doubt the diagnosis of epilepsy. Chapter 137. Power output structure diagrams, transmission structure diagrams, nozzle design diagrams, all kinds of drawings with different sizes and different uses appeared. Just like the slides shown by Professor Zhou of Yue University during his lectures, they flashed before his eyes one by one, appearing and disappearing. However, the scope of these drawings was obviously much wider than the scope of the university professors. In addition to the drawings, there were also endless scenery films. The Federation photographers used different angles to take different still images, all of which were breathtakingly beautiful. Especially the pictures of the Federation's major planets taken from spaceships, they were even more awe-inspiring. There were also flowers, all kinds of flowers. There were also women, all kinds of women. Su Lu was half leaning on the hospital bed. The hospital bed could automatically adjust its height, so it was more comfortable to lie down. However, he stared at his thigh that was still sealed by the white plastic and suspended on the metal frame like a white cement stick. There was no expression of comfort on his face. Instead, he felt like he had seen a ghost. His expression was unusually ugly. Because at this time, there was a red flower in full bloom on his thigh. At this time, Su Lu could clearly see that this picture did not appear on the white plastic. Instead, it appeared in a certain area of his brain related to the optic nerve. Then, it appeared in his perception as a flower bloomed on his retina. This was already the patient Su Li's 17th day in the hospital. His epilepsy did not seem to have recurred. At least, the doctor did not hear the bell ring or hear his own report that he had hallucinations again. Although in fact, the hallucinations were always there. When the structure diagram turned into a picture of the mind, Sula knew that things were serious. This was definitely not epilepsy. These images that appeared in front of his eyes like miracles seemed to have a mind of their own and could appear and disappear according to his strong emotional will. Sula was in the lonely ward at that time. He missed his hometown, the Donglin region. Therefore, the picture of the Donglin planet's mind from the universe appeared in front of his eyes. In the middle of the night, when there was no one around, Sula forcibly suppressed the fear and uneasiness in his heart and silently carried out many experiments again. He found that when his will was strong enough, some images related to his will would appear in front of his eyes, such as the mountain, the dog, and the woman. The abnormal discharge of neurons in the gray matter of the cerebral cortex was absolutely impossible to control. She had never heard of epilepsy patients being able to make the electrical discharge in their brain work according to their own thoughts, as if they were accessing a database, unless they were taking drugs. What exactly happened? Sula thought about it silently for many days, but he still couldn't figure it out. Since he was sure that it wasn't a hallucination caused by epilepsy, he didn't tell the experts in the 1st Military General Hospital the truth because he was very worried. When he realized that the strangeness in his brain had little to do with epilepsy, he immediately thought of the so-called muscle spasms that had been monitored by the hospital. It was the power in his body that was repairing itself. It was the trembling that Sula was incomparably familiar with. However, he was able to successfully control the trembling under his skin. When he was asleep or unconscious, it continued to operate on its own. This was Sula's secret, not a symptom caused by epilepsy. Regardless of the dissuasion of the hospital experts, he insisted on removing all the monitoring equipment during his sleep at night and unplugging all the electrodes on his body. Otherwise, if someone really found out the real reason for his muscle fibrillary spasms, who knew how much trouble it would cause? These days, Sula alone and silently resisted the images in his eyes. He told himself that all of this was an illusion and that it wouldn't scare him. However, after gradually getting used to the images that appeared with his will, even if they weren't illusions, he was a little numb. After all, these images didn't really turn him into a lunatic. Those images didn't appear in his eyes at any time. Instead, it required Sula to be extremely focused on certain aspects of the content. Then, these images would be pulled out from his mind and presented before his eyes. If those images really appeared in his eyes at any time, Sula could guarantee that his nerves, which were stronger than the average person's, would not collapse. Because that would mean that as long as he opened his eyes, he would constantly see two completely different images, one real and one fake. Wouldn't that be the picture-in-picture function of the legendary antique television? Or the monstrous hero with two pupils in an even more ancient myth? In the middle of the night, when there was no one around, he tried many times. With the fastest speed, he desperately tried to recall all the images that could be pulled out in his mind. He confirmed that those were not his knowledge, his memories. He silently looked at the flower on his leg. Sula knew that his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. Instead, it was his eyes that gave birth to a flower, or someone planted a flower in his mind. It had been a few days since he fell into the unknown uneasiness and fear. Sula forced himself to calmly analyze all the things that had happened since he fell into a coma. After eliminating the possibility that the hospital had used him as an experiment, he naturally flipped through the memories that were dormant in his mind. It was the memory of the black dream after he fell into a coma. Yes, all of the images seemed to be familiar. They all came from the strange and absurd dream after he fell into a coma. He vaguely understood something, but still didn't understand anything. He didn't know when and by whom these images were poured into his mind. Why were they so different from normal memory images? Why could they appear so clearly and vividly in front of his eyes? Suli's hand gradually and gently touched the back of his neck. He carefully stroked that small piece of skin. After a long silence, he confirmed that there should be something wrong with this chip. When the heat flow in his body turned into a huge burst of energy, it caused some kind of damage to the chip. The damaged chip uncontrollably released pulses or electric currents, causing abnormal discharge in his cerebral cortex. This caused him to enter that strange black dream after he fell into a coma. Furthermore, it was deeply imprinted in his mind, causing those images to appear in front of his eyes. But the problem was, could it be that the chip itself stored those things? How could he get out of this situation? Could it be that he had to change the chip from the bracelet and start a new life? But the damage to his brain had already become a reality. Would it be useful to change the chip? Would he become a real idiot in the future because of the abnormal discharge in his brain? Although it wasn't epilepsy, it seemed that the current situation was more terrible than epilepsy. Su Lo stared at the snow-white ceiling. His facial features were slightly twisted in pain. He kept cursing Uncle Feng Yu in his heart. Fake products killed people. Perhaps it was because Su Lo had followed Uncle Feng Yu and practiced the horse stance and those strange postures for many years, but his physical fitness was already much better than the average person's. Thus, the injuries on his body healed very quickly. This was especially true for his comminuted thigh bone. On the daily photo transmissions, those cracks seemed to be gathering together at a speed visible to the naked eye. This made the doctors in the general hospital click their tongues in wonder. If they didn't know that this patient's origins were a little strange and his background was a little shocking, perhaps they really would have thought of asking Su Lo to cooperate with their research. Those tubes inserted into Su Li's body had long been removed. In just 1 month since he had been admitted to the hospital, the penetrating wounds left by those military firearms had basically healed. After all, the bones were not injured. Those muscle fibers that had been torn apart and charred by the high-speed rotating bullets had already healed. Only a few pink traces of new skin remained on his skin. The thigh bone that had been fractured by the mecha's recoil couldn't heal so quickly, but at this time, Su Lo could at least sit in a wheelchair and relax in the beautiful environment of the general hospital. He wasn't afraid of loneliness, but he didn't like those snow-white walls and ceilings in the ward. This was because every time he was alone, he couldn't help but try to use the snow-white ceiling as the background and pull out those memory fragments in his mind, playing them like a slide show for himself. As he played, he felt fear, but he couldn't stop even if he wanted to. Su Lo felt like a pitiful person who was addicted to drugs. Shaking his head, Su Li's face flushed red with embarrassment. He quickly stopped looking at those images of all kinds of women in his mind. These images were too clear and too realistic. It was like looking at a porn magazine. As long as he thought about it, he would be able to see the endlessly tempting porn. And it wasn't the usual imagination that flooded the minds of most men, but real images. What kind of realm was this? This was the true meaning of lust. Su Lo, who was new to the relationship between a man and a woman, could barely control his desire to peek at the portrait of 1,000 women in the corner of his mind. However, he naturally thought of his girlfriend. At least in his mind, she was still his girlfriend. Whether it was the fear of his brain's abnormal condition, the stimulation he received, or the loneliness brought about by long-term hospital life, they all made him very eager to see Zhang Xiameng. The relationship between a man and a woman was nothing more than external factors that stimulated growth. Not to mention, Su Lo was facing pressure from all sides at this time. From the moment she found out that Su Lo was injured, Zhang Xiameng had already prepared to leave for Jingzhou. After experiencing the failure and disappointment of the Double Moon Festival ball, the non-professional spy girl obviously hadn't learned her lesson. She still subconsciously saw herself as a normal person. Knowing that the man she liked was injured, of course, she couldn't sit still on campus. However, due to Su Li's abnormal condition, Zhang Xiameng's arrival was delayed for a long time. It wasn't until a few days ago that Su Lo became numb to the strange phenomenon caused by the abnormal power generation in his brain. Moreover, he really couldn't suppress his longing for Zhang Xiameng. The two agreed to meet at the hospital on the 14th. However, just as he was about to call Zhang Xiameng to confirm when she would arrive in Jingzhou, his phone received a text message from an unknown number. Chapter 138. There was an old song in the Federation called 27 Glasses of Wine. The song went like this: the first glass of wine, the sun shone brightly, the ivy outside the window crawled into my eyes. The second glass of wine, the spring breeze rippled, the leaves gently brushed my eyebrows. The third glass of wine, the birds chirped, lightly pecking at my heart. The fourth glass of wine, the shadow on the windowsill, making me forget who I am. The fifth glass of wine, the youth was about to fly, passing through the layers of forest. 11 glasses of wine, the mountains were green, an old man was drunk on a rock. 12 glasses of wine, peeking into the abyss, the cliff gave back to the years. 13 glasses of wine, the snail had horns, the world was so tired. 14 glasses of wine, the eyes were getting tired, the people around the fire were about to fall asleep. 25 glasses of wine, thinking of my father, the raindrops fell from the window. 26 glasses of wine, the flies did not fly, the palpitating you and I hid under the leaves, watching the autumn rain fade away. 27 glasses of wine, wiping away a few tears, gently putting down the glasses. This ancient song had always existed in the Federation Elementary School's public teaching materials. It was a poem that all citizens of the Federation had probably learned at one time or another. This poem used ordinary and simple language to describe a young man drinking alone in the rain. Looking at the scenery outside the window, his mind gradually flew into the mountains and rivers, experiencing the imagination of several lifetimes. In the end, his mind returned to his body, remembering his loved ones who had passed away, and tears fell from his eyes alone. The original author of this simple and touching poem had long been untraceable. Moreover, in today's highly developed technological civilization, not many people would still remember this little poem in their hearts. When Sulu was in the Donglin district, he rarely had the opportunity to hear this song, except in the movie directed by the famous director Lin Longji, who cleverly used 27 glasses of wine as the background music throughout the entire movie. The most recent time that Sulu heard 27 glasses of wine was in the bar in Linhai. Shi Qinghai, who had an astonishing capacity for liquor, drank 27 cups of strong liquor in a row in that quiet bar on that rainy night before finally getting drunk. He tapped the wine bottle with his chopsticks and sang the song in a soothing and emotional manner to the rhythm of the clanging. His voice was not very pleasant, but it was somewhat hoarse from the torture of alcohol and tobacco. Together with the lyrics, it seemed to have experienced many vicissitudes of life, making people want to cry. At the end of the song, when he thought of his father, the flies did not fly, and put down the glasses. Shi Qinghai finally cried out loud, letting his tears and snot flow onto Su Li's lapel. Therefore, when he saw the text message, 27 glasses of wine, Sulu immediately knew that it was from Shi Qinghai. It had been almost a month since he had been able to contact Shi Qinghai, so Sulu was a little anxious. However, because there was a big problem with his brain, and because Shi Qinghai had mysteriously disappeared for dozens of days while carrying out a secret government mission, Sulu was not too worried. At this time, he finally began to worry. Shi Qinghai was using a brand new number, and he was using 27 glasses of wine as a substitute. In this world, except for himself and Shi Qinghai, there was probably no one who could understand who 27 glasses of wine was referring to. What made Sulu even more confused and nervous was that Mr. Shi had warned him to be careful of Zhang Xiaomeng. Why? Zhang Xiaomeng had been secretly serving the anti-government Senator Macklin. On the last day of last year at the Iron Tower, she had seriously violated the rules and told Sulu. After all, Mr. Shi was an official of the Federation Bureau of Investigation. Could it be that the government had found out about Zhang Xiaomeng, so he deliberately sent a text message to warn him? Sulu thought to himself. However, Macklin was now a senator of the Federation, and in the news a few days ago, that old man had made a joint statement with the governor of Jingzhou. Even if the government knew that Zhang Xiaomeng was serving Senator Macklin, there shouldn't be any problems with Zhang Xiaomeng, right? Sulu lay on the hospital bed with his eyes slightly closed. After thinking for a long time, he gave up on the idea of calling back that unknown number. There was something fishy about this matter, so he had to be more careful. His finger pressed the number 2 on the phone, but he didn't press it. In the end, he pressed 1. There's something I want to ask you for help with. What is it? Tai Ziyuan's voice on the other end of the phone was very calm. I have a friend called Shi Qinghai. He's the director of the 4th section of the Federation Bureau of Investigation's field office in Linhai. I haven't contacted him for many days. I don't know if he knows that I'm hospitalized. Continue. I know that your family has a good relationship with the government. Can I trouble you to help me find out if there's something wrong with him? If he's carrying out some secret mission from the government, please help me confirm it. At least I don't have to worry too much. Tai Ziyuan's voice on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time. Su Lo, who was half leaning on the hospital bed, narrowed his eyes and felt a trace of a bad omen. I know that Shi Qinghai is your friend. Tai Ziyuan held the phone and said calmly, I found out about his news a few days ago. I wanted to tell you at that time, but your current condition is too bad, so I didn't say anything. Su Li's narrowed eyes flashed with a trace of doubt. He asked, what happened to him? The Federation Bureau of Investigation is currently looking for your friend, Tai Ziyuan said. Under these circumstances, you naturally have no way to contact him. He's an official of the Bureau of Investigation. How could he be wanted? Su Li's expression changed greatly as he asked in surprise. I don't know what the specific crime is, but I think it has something to do with intelligence. Su Lo was silent on the other end of the phone for a long time. Then he earnestly asked, I'm going to be discharged immediately. Can you help me buy the fastest ticket back to Linhai? Tai Ziyuan on the other end of the phone frowned. He didn't expect that Su Lo, who was always calm, would actually make such a decision immediately after hearing this news. He disapproved and said in a deep voice, what do you want to do? Don't forget that you're still seriously injured. One of your legs is still disabled. My injury is almost healed. Although I can't move my legs, at least I can use crutches and sit in a wheelchair. Su Lo heard the concern in the other's angry voice, so he wasn't angry and explained. Tai Ziyuan said without hesitation, impossible. The general hospital won't let you leave. That's why I need your help, Su Lo said. Shi Qinghai is in trouble. I have to go back and see what's going on. I can help you find out what happened. Tai Ziyuan didn't tell Su Lo the whole truth, because he knew Su Li's character. If Su Lo knew that Shi Qinghai was being investigated by the Federation government because of him, Su Lo would be even more determined to go back. But you have to calm down. You're just a student. Even if you go back to Linhai immediately, what can you do? Tai Ziyuan frowned and tried to persuade him, and don't forget that he's now a wanted criminal of the Federation. Su Lo on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time before he said, I have to go back. A wanted criminal of the Federation, in the hearts of ordinary citizens of the Federation, was definitely someone to be avoided like the plague. However, Su Lo himself was a wanted criminal who hid the most deeply, not on the list of wanted criminals. He believed that if he could go back to Linhai, Shi Qinghai, who was currently in a dangerous situation, would be able to easily find him, just like when he sent the message just now. And he had the ability to help him. Tai Ziyuan on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time before he said, the situation in Linhai is very complicated. You don't have to go back. He was thinking for Su Li's sake, but Su Lo, in such a tense situation, didn't think about anything at all. He directly replied, I have to go back. Tai Ziyuan's voice rose in pitch in anger as he reprimanded, can't you calm down a little? Be more mature. Su Lo on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time. His voice didn't become louder, nor did it become angry. He just said calmly, Shi Qinghai is my friend, and so are you. When a friend is in trouble, I can't be too calm or mature. If I was a little calmer and more mature in the gymnasium, you would already be dead. There were many concepts about friends, but in Su Li's mind, when the other person was in a life or death situation, he would appear by the other person's side and help without thinking. This was what a true friend was. It had to be said that although Tai Ziyuan had always deliberately made his conversation with Su Lo seem as natural as an ordinary citizen of the Federation, he was not an ordinary person after all. He was at the top of this society. Tai Ziyuan's desire to control was naturally strong. Occasionally, his words and actions would reveal a bit of the attitude of a superior, which was what Su Lo wasn't used to. When he found that Su Lo was out of his control, he had mixed feelings and couldn't help but sigh. He looked at the phone in his hand that had been hung up and laughed self-deprecatingly. He thought that it was precisely because this guy had saved him more than once that he had to stop him from doing anything unwise. Tell the hospital to tighten their control. Don't let Su Lu sneak back to Lin Hai. Tai Ziyuan calmly said to Butler Jean beside him, we've already started investigating Zhang Xiaomeng, and Shi Qinghai is already a fugitive. If Su Lu returns to Lin Hai at this time, it will only make everyone misunderstand. It won't do him any good. Should we use coercive measures? Butler Jean asked from the side. Tai Ziyuan's delicate eyes flashed with a trace of mockery. Fortunately, he's injured now. Otherwise, if he really wanted to leave the hospital, with our family's bodyguards, who could stop him? Butler Jean smiled slightly, understanding the young master's meaning. After the incident in the gymnasium, the Tai family's security personnel all knew that the young master had a student friend by his side. What shocked them the most was that during the assassination incident, this student's combat ability was even stronger than that of the special forces. Then we won't use coercive measures. Just have people follow him 24/7 and block him in the hospital with a meat wall. Chapter 139. Ever since that phone call, several black cars had been parked at the entrance of the Federation's 1st Military Region General Hospital. In the first-level ward area of the inpatient department, there were many men in dark suits. Especially around Su Li's ward, a real wall of flesh had appeared. At this time, Su Li's injury had exceeded everyone's expectations. He was much better. Although he still had to continue receiving rehabilitation treatment, and his right leg was still a pitiful white cement pillar, at least he could leave his bed occasionally. He could go to the toilet by himself, and he no longer needed a urinary catheter. He could sit in his electric wheelchair and wander freely in the woods of the inpatient department to relax. But ever since the day he called Tai Ziyuan, no matter where Su Lu went to the toilet or did something else, he would be followed by at least 3 Tai family bodyguards. When he went to the toilet, someone would open the door for him, and someone would bring him toilet paper. When he wanted to sit in his wheelchair and go downstairs to relax, there would be several pairs of hands pushing the wheelchair for him. What kind of treatment was this? This was probably the treatment of a Federation councilman in the hospital. Su Li's mood was a little gloomy. He knew why these walls of flesh had appeared. When he looked at the entrance of the inpatient department in the woods, he knew that he could not leave the hospital until he fully recovered. This situation made him feel a little gloomy. He tried to send a few messages to that unknown number, but there was no reply. Especially when he found out that he could not even get through to Zhang Xiaomeng's phone, a strong sense of uneasiness surged into his mind. He knew that Tai Ziyuan was doing this for his own good, and it was even more impossible for him to be angry at the walls of flesh around him. These bodyguards were all staff who took orders from their superiors. It was not appropriate to vent his anger on them. Other than calling Tai Ziyuan a few times and scolding him, Su Lu could not do anything else. However, even after Tai Ziyuan was scolded by him, he still calmly tried to persuade him. The air around him was getting thicker and thicker. It was so thick that no matter how hard Su Lu punched, he could not get a clear response. He was almost out of breath. At this time, a visitor came to the hospital. When this visitor entered the ward, the bodyguards guarding outside the ward felt that their eyes were dazzled by the sun. They looked at each other in disbelief, not daring to believe their eyes. Naturally, they forgot to stop that person. Even if these bodyguards came back to their senses, they might not have the courage to stop her. The Federation's idol, Jian Shuier, had actually appeared in front of him and entered the ward. The bodyguards of the Tai family looked at the figure walking through the door, then looked at the middle-aged woman who stayed outside the door. They quickly reported to their superiors through the intercom. Now, the only place that no one had disturbed him was this ward. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the snow-white ceiling. He did not bring out the images caused by the abnormal electrical discharge in his mind. Instead, he calmly thought about everything that had happened since the Double Moon Festival ball. Sister Tong was guarding the door. Jian Shuier was sitting on a chair by the window. She tilted her head slightly and looked at Su Lu, who was in a daze on the bed. She thought about the Thai family's bodyguard she had seen along the way and felt that this seemingly ordinary young man was interesting. The successor of the Thai family really valued this guy called Su Lo. It seemed that Sister Tong's judgment was wrong. This young man called Su Lo was obviously not a member of the Thai family who had received much attention because he had saved Tai Ziyuan's life in the gymnasium. Su Lo saw a flash of purple from the corner of his eyes and woke up with a start. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the girl by the window. Looking at the light yellow dress she was wearing, he couldn't help but think about the first person he saw when he woke up from the dark dream. She was wearing a white dress that shone under the sun. After informing the Thai family, Jian Shui'er and Sister Tong never came to the hospital again. These days, Su Lo would occasionally think about that dreamlike day, but he did not expect to see the woman of his dreams again in real life. Being able to see her by chance was already dreamy enough. Su Lo had never thought about what would happen after that. In addition, so many strange things had happened in the hospital after that, he had almost forgotten that Jian Shui'er had ever appeared. "Why are you here?" It was a boring opening, but Su Lo, who was slightly nervous and happy, could only say this sentence. Jian Shui'er smiled sweetly, a trace of a cute smile flashing through her large, mirror-like eyes. She replied in a clear and pleasant voice, "You are the first person I have saved in my life. Of course I have to come and see how your injuries are doing." This was a joke. And this sentence was not accurate at all. In the past few days, other than promoting her first album in the various states of Region S1, Jian Shui'er spent the rest of her time at home in the capital. Other than occasionally seeing mecha promos on TV and thinking of the incomparably brave young man in the parking lot, she had actually gradually forgotten about Su Lo. After all, it was impossible for the two of them to have much interaction. Today, she had come to Jingzhou again, to the 1st Military Region's General Hospital, because of a troubling matter. The elders in her family had asked her to come to the 1st Military Region for a meal. Who would have thought that there would be a young man at the table? With her intelligence, of course she understood the meaning of this meal, and very naturally, the idea of leaving was born. The car drove along the streets of the 1st Military Region's residential area. She narrowed her eyes and looked at the sycamore trees beside the street, breathing in the fresh air. This Federation idol, the little lover in the hearts of hundreds of millions of people, suddenly felt that life was very meaningless. When she saw the entrance of the General Hospital, her thoughts moved slightly, and she thought of that interesting guy. Su Lo looked at Jian Shui'er by the window. Looking at her short purple hair that was tied up in a ponytail, he was momentarily stunned. He did not know how to describe this girl's face. He felt that any more words would sound a bit tacky. Of course, this saying was pretty tacky in itself. He just felt that no matter if the girl not far from him was smiling, frowning, or spacing out, she was still so beautiful. She was so beautiful that she was not like a real person, but like a picture. His heart moved slightly, and he forced himself to calm down. He thought of a possibility, and asked somewhat uneasily, "Miss Jian Shui'er, can I ask you to do me a favor?" The bodyguards that Butler Jean arranged to stay at the General Hospital to take care of Su Li's daily life were all from the most famous security company in the Federation. They were the most professional bodyguards. Therefore, when Su Li sat in a wheelchair under the forest to avoid the southern hemisphere's sunlight, they still silently stood in an inconspicuous corner under the sunlight, calmly observing everything that happened there. However, today's silence did not last long. One of the two bodyguards said softly, "Do you know what kind of person we are protecting this time?" The other person looked straight ahead, the corner of his lips slightly raised, and said, "Young master's friend. He's a very awesome guy." In the stadium's underground parking lot, this student killed 6 soldiers by himself, the first bodyguard said softly. The combat power of the Linhai garrison force is just a so-so. But you can't do it. I heard that he used to be a soldier, the bodyguard said. The bodyguard said, but what I admire the most about him is. Even Jian Shui'er came to visit him. Who exactly is this guy? I am an orphan. I have a friend who is also an orphan. He is in big trouble. And I have a good friend who has everything, including these bodyguards. Su Lu said with a bitter smile. I want to help my friend who is in trouble, but another good friend of mine locked me up in this hospital out of concern for me. The good friend who has everything you are talking about is naturally Tai Ziyuan. Jian Shui'er stretched lazily behind the wheelchair, feeling extremely relaxed. She was certain that coming to the hospital today was the right decision. For some reason, being around this guy named Su Lu always made her feel relaxed for no reason. It was as if there was an aura of absolute trust around him. You know Tai Ziyuan? Su Lu asked curiously. He then turned his head and said sincerely, Miss Jian, I have yet to repay you for saving my life, and now I have to ask for your help so unreasonably. I hope you won't be angry. I repeat, I did not save your life. Jian Shui'er heard Su Lu repeatedly say that she had saved his life. Her lowered cheeks blushed slightly. She said, but I think Tai Ziyuan's consideration must be reasonable. The way I see it, the key is whether or not you can really help your friend who is in trouble after you go back. If you are just impulsive and go back like a headless fly, then there is no need for you to help. It must be said that Jian Shui'er's casual words pointed out the crux of the problem. Friends did need to help and trust each other, but if they were faced with an unknown future and couldn't do anything to help each other, it could only mean that the person involved was blinded by passion. Sitting in the wheelchair, Su Lu was silent for a moment. His fingers subconsciously gripped his sunglasses and hat tightly. Jian Shui'er always had sunglasses and hat with her when she went out. Now that Jian Shui'er had condescended to push his wheelchair for him, these things were naturally placed in his hands. Su Li's fingers slowly slid over the sunglasses and finally landed on his wrist. He gently stroked the smooth metal bracelet. Su Li made up his mind and said calmly, no matter what kind of trouble my friend is in, I think if I can meet him, I can definitely help him get rid of this kind of trouble. Jian Shui'er smiled and looked at the young man with a crew cut on the wheelchair in front of her. Suddenly, she felt that the strong confidence in his words was a little. Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt that her mood today was very strange. Her eyes naturally lowered and landed on the bracelet on her wrist. A trace of nostalgia flashed in her clear eyes. What do you need me to do? I want to be discharged from the hospital, and I need a plane ticket and some money. Su Lu touched the military trench coat under his wheelchair and scratched his head a little embarrassedly. I lost my bank card, and I don't have a single cent on me. Tai Ziyuan, that brat, took me into account. Jian Shui'er cutely giggled. This was the first time she heard someone call the young master of the Tai family that brat. Chapter 140. In the speeding car, Su Lu looked at Sister Tong, who was in the driver's seat. He couldn't help but look at Jian Shui'er, who was beside him, and said, "Thank you, but how do we get rid of those people?" The process of leaving the 1st Military Region's General Hospital was extremely simple. It was so simple that even after Su Lu got into Jian Shui'er's car, he still felt a little confused. Jian Shui'er, who was wearing a light yellow dress, pushed Su Li's wheelchair out of the quiet entrance of the inpatient department. The Tai family's staff in the hospital were all stunned for a moment. They didn't take any effective measures. To be honest, they probably didn't have the courage to do anything rude to the Federation's idol and the nation's most beautiful girl. The car drove on the streets of the 1st Military Region's residential area. The Tai family's bodyguard's car followed behind them. Su Lu felt a little apologetic towards Tai Ziyuan, but he was more worried about how to get rid of those people. If they kept following him, even if he took a plane back to Linhai, he would still be isolated from the outside world by the Tai family's wall of flesh. Jian Shui'er had already put on her sunglasses. Most of her eye-catching purple hair was also covered by a cap. Although this teenage idol, who was not yet 18 years old, had to dress up when she went out, the large sunglasses did not give her the image of an iceberg-like celebrity who did not allow people to get close to her. Instead, when she wore them on her small and straight nose, she looked especially cute. Even now, sitting side by side with Jian Shui'er still made Su Lu feel nervous from the bottom of his heart. He couldn't help but think about how he was able to get to know Jian Shui'er and get Jian Shui'er to help him, but when he saw the cute girl next to him, he realized that Jian Shui'er wasn't even 18 years old yet. The calmness and maturity that she showed before weren't what a young girl should be like. Don't worry. The sunglasses covered most of Jian Shui'er's face. Her rosy lips parted slightly. She smiled and said, when it comes to how to get rid of being followed, I'm the expert in this area. Obviously, being suddenly involved in Su Li's escape made this young idol feel a trace of excitement. She was like a runaway girl, excitedly patting Su Li's shoulder. Half of Su Li's body suddenly stiffened. He noticed that Sister Tong, who was driving, had an unpleasant expression on her face. However, he misunderstood the feelings of Jian Shui'er and Sister Tong. He thought that Jian Shui'er claimed to be an expert because she had countless fans in the Federation who often followed her whereabouts, while Sister Tong was unhappy because Jian Shui'er patted her shoulder. In fact, elder Sister Tong's expression was because she thought of the time a few years ago when the young miss kept pulling her to escape from the family's surveillance. That was such a headache-inducing memory, but it was also quite interesting. The corners of Sister Tong's lips curled up into a smile. Half an hour later, the car arrived at the largest Fuqiao airport in the southwest area of Jingzhou. After parking the car in the underground parking lot, the three of them took the elevator and entered the spacious waiting hall. The Tai family bodyguards who had been following them also followed in groups of 2s and 3s. They stood not too far away from them, nervously and vigilantly watching everything around them. According to your request, we booked 3 tickets. If you don't want people to find out how you're going back to Linhai, you can choose your own route. I don't care about that, Sister Tong said coldly to Su Lu, I just hope you don't do anything illegal. Jian Shui'er, who was wearing a cap and a normal jacket in the parking lot, looked like a refreshing teenager. However, the large sunglasses on her small nose made her look a bit out of place. The passengers walking around couldn't help but take a few more glances. Some of them wondered why this teenager gave off such a familiar feeling. However, no one associated this teenager with the national girl of the Federation. After all, no one would have thought that Jian Shui'er would actually appear in front of them. Su Lu, who was leaning on a steel cane that retracted automatically, took the tickets with both hands and sincerely expressed his thanks to Sister Tong. Then, he turned around, bowed to Jian Shui'er, and said sincerely, Miss Jian, I really don't know how to thank you. No need to thank me. Helping a cripple escape is quite fun, isn't it? Jian Shui'er was like a teenager. She pointed 2 fingers at the brim of her cap and slightly tilted her head. She was extremely cute and witty. But I think right now, you're having a headache. How can you get on the plane under the watchful eyes of the Tai family bodyguards, and how can you not let them know your itinerary? Su Lu was a bit embarrassed and said, yeah. At this time, the 3 of them were at the entrance of the VIP passage. There were very few passengers passing through this passage. The Tai family bodyguards at the bookstore and the gangway were particularly obvious. There's a phrase called leaving during the chaos. Jian Shui'er looked at Su Lu and said with a smile, I can create chaos. Whether or not you can leave depends on your ability. After saying this, Jian Shui'er took off the large sunglasses on her nose and took off her cap at the same time. Just like at home, she casually scratched her messy short purple hair. A chaos caused by Jian Shui'er's sudden appearance occurred at Fuqiao Airport without warning. Countless passengers excitedly rushed to the VIP passage. Lights began to flash non-stop, mixed with countless friendly greetings. The Tai family bodyguards were suddenly scattered by the waves of people, and found that they had lost sight of Su Lu. Su Li's reaction was very fast. The moment Jian Shui'er took off her sunglasses, he knew where the chaos she was talking about came from. And when Jian Shui'er's beautiful purple hair bloomed under her cap, he had quietly taken off his jacket under the cover of the surrounding crowd and got on the express boarding vehicle provided by the airport. Time passed quickly. When he got on the flight to Shangya, the Tai family bodyguards had time to report the disappearance of the target to their superiors. If he wants to leave, it shouldn't be easy to stop him. Plus, that lady is helping him. Tai Ziyuan sighed softly and said to butler Jean, "Inform Blackhawk Security Company that there's a mission in Linhai." Sula didn't fly directly to Linhai, because if he did, he might be surrounded by the Tai family bodyguards again as soon as he got off the plane. Naturally, there would be no way to contact Shi Qinghai. He chose to fly to Shangye. Shangye was relatively close to Linhai, and it was also a relatively inconspicuous place. Sister Tong booked the economy class for him, but he didn't care, because he was never rich. The problem was that he was still a patient, and his right leg was like a white cement stick. Sitting in the economy class seat was indeed a bit uncomfortable. Fortunately, the air stewardess on this flight was very kind and gave him a free upgrade. Thus, Sula thanked her repeatedly. "I heard that you can make phone calls on flights now." Sula looked at the flight attendant squatting next to him and asked curiously. "Yes, sir. It's directly transferred through satellite. The cost is the same as normal calls, and you need to pay with a credit card," the flight attendant said sweetly. After hesitating for a moment, Sula said very embarrassedly, "I was in a hurry to go back to Shangye, and I forgot to inform my friends at the airport about the arrival time of the flight. As you can see, there's something wrong with my leg. If no one picks me up, it will be a bit inconvenient. But I also forgot to take my phone." The flight attendant was slightly stunned. She smiled and said, "Do you want to borrow my phone?" "Yes, I'm really sorry for the trouble." The coat Sulu was wearing today was a coat provided by the hospital's Thai family staff. She couldn't tell what brand it was, but the material was good. Coupled with his sincere expression and thick eyebrows, he looked very refreshing. The flight attendant smiled slightly, thinking that this young man was really shy and cute. While thanking her profusely, Sula took her phone and searched for the unknown number that Shi Qinghai was using. After thinking for a moment, he sent a short message, "I'm in the horse stance. I'll arrive at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Contact me, I have a plan." It had been more than a month, but it felt like a lifetime ago. During this time, Sula had almost died once. Another big problem appeared in his mind. After returning from the south to Linhai, from the warm ocean climate to the harsh wind and snow environment, Sula didn't think too much about his body and his brain. He just squinted his eyes, leaned on his metal crutches, and walked out of Shangye's airport. He got into a taxi. The car ride was silent. Sulu returned to the university town of Linhai, which he was familiar with. He was extremely cautious and didn't contact anyone, especially Zhang Xiaoming. It was impossible for him to go back to school. Instead, he went to the coffee shop on Famous Store Street alone. He asked for a cup of coffee and silently looked at the snow outside the window. He stared at the phone with a metallic luster on the green tablecloth. When he arrived at the coffee shop, he bought a few brand new SIM cards from the small shops that could be seen everywhere in the university town. At the same time, he sent a message to the number that Shi Qinghai was using. All that was left was to wait. The phone lay quietly on the tablecloth. Sulu stared at it silently, tightly holding the automatically retractable steel crutches in his hand. Gradually, his eyes moved to the alloy bracelet on his wrist. Just like what he said to Miss Jian Shuier before leaving the hospital, he firmly believed that after he found Shi Qinghai, he would be able to help him escape from the Federation's arrest warrant. At this moment, the phone rang. Shi Qinghai's calm voice came from the other end. Shi Qinghai told him a house number. On the phone, Shi Qinghai wasn't so moved that he was speechless for a long time, nor did he angrily accuse him of being stupid. He just said a few words calmly. This was because he and Sulu were the same kind of people. When they knew that the other was in trouble, they would do anything to help. Since the other had come for him, there was no point in saying more. Sulu paid the bill and left. With some difficulty, he supported himself with the steel crutches. In the wind and snow of Linhai, he walked toward the streets deep in the city. Chapter 141. It was still a bar. Sulu pushed open the heavy glass door and smelled the familiar scent of pine nut wine and the nuts that went with the wine. He couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that even though he was wanted by the Federation, Shi Qinghai was still reluctant to drink. From this point of view, this guy seemed to lack some of the good habits of a professional agent. It was about 11:00 in the morning. The streets near the sea were shrouded in the wind and snow of late winter. The bar opened earlier than usual in order to protect the drunkards who craved for a sip of hot wine in the cold winter. But at this time, business was still average and the bar was relatively quiet. At the innermost table facing the entrance of the bar, there was a young man wearing a light gray windbreaker. His hair was neatly combed, and he was sipping his drink with his head slightly lowered. After Su Le entered the bar, he saw the man at first glance. He was startled and didn't immediately go forward to greet him. Instead, he leaned on his crutch and slowly walked to a table not adjacent to each other. He ordered a glass of white gold. The man in the gray windbreaker quickly finished his drink. He seemed to be thinking about something. He gently knocked on the table 3 times, left the money for the drink, and walked to the back of the bar in an extremely inconspicuous manner. There's probably a back door there, Su Le thought in his heart. He lowered his head and looked at the white gold in the glass. He couldn't help but frown. This kind of S1 specialty, pure and high-quality white wine, was still very harsh to the throat after being paired with honey melon juice. After drinking with Shi Qinghai countless times, he still found it difficult to adapt. After sitting for about 3 minutes, Su Le finally finished the transparent liquor in the glass. He painfully licked his lips, handed the money to the bartender, and asked for the location of the restroom. The bartender politely pointed the way, and Su Le walked to the back of the bar. It's a pity that you're not a spy. Shi Qinghai's eyes calmly looked straight ahead on the road. This pair of peach blossom eyes that had charmed countless young women seemed a little tired at this moment. It seemed that these days of escaping had brought unprecedented pressure to this excellent spy of the anti-government army. Su Le forced a smile. He lowered the hat on his head and tightened the synthetic fur scarf around his neck. At this time, the black off-road car was quietly driving on the streets of Linhai State. The heating in the car was not turned on, so it was a little cold. I got this car from Shangye. Now, I don't dare to refuel it casually, so I have to be a little more frugal, Shi Qinghai explained calmly with a cigarette in one hand and the steering wheel in the other. Su Le shrunk his body in the passenger seat. After a while, he said, "You just said that you are a spy planted by the anti-government forces in the government. The reason why your identity was exposed was because your superior was betrayed by a traitor within the anti-government army, which implicated you. The most important question is, the Federation government is now suspecting you of being the source of intelligence for the Linhai State Gymnasium assassination." Su Le exhaled a puff of smoke into his hand and looked at the road ahead in confusion. It's too messy. It's really messy. Shi Qinghai stubbed out the cigarette and looked straight at the snowy road ahead. He said, "My teacher's superior died too quickly, so I didn't find out who the traitor in the organization was. I've been investigating these days and vaguely guessed something, but unfortunately, I don't have any evidence. Why do you want me to be careful of Zhang Xiameng?" Su Le stared at his side profile and asked. The Federation Investigation Bureau has been investigating how Tai Ziyuan's whereabouts were leaked. Shi Qinghai's face showed a trace of a mocking smile. After investigating so much, they could only find you. The Tai family seems to have too much confidence in their staff. Since Tai Ziyuan's whereabouts were leaked by you, you should know very well who you told when you were going to the concert the next day. The night before the New Year, I was drinking with you. You should have met with Zhang Xiameng before that. Shi Qinghai frowned slightly. I'm sure that I didn't tell anyone about this. Then, why was the National Defense Department's Eagle faction's assassination attempt on the young master of the Tai family so timely and so accurate? There's only one explanation. The information was leaked by Zhang Xiameng. I know, she's a spy. Su Le's head was lowered. His right hand gently stroked his injured leg, which was a little painful from the cold. It was cold to the touch. It was as firm and cold as cement. She served Senator Macklin. The black touring car smoothly stopped on the side of the road next to the Rose River. Shi Qinghai turned his head and looked at Su Le beside him. He said in a serious tone, "You know that she's a spy. Don't you have any other thoughts?" "What thoughts can I have?" Su Le leaned against the seat of the car. His eyes were calm as he looked ahead. He said in a lonely voice, "I only have 3 friends. 2 of them are spies, and 1 of them is a big shot. I'm a little numb to this kind of thing." He suddenly turned his head and stared into Shi Qinghai's eyes. He said very angrily, "Do I have a special trait that attracts spies?" Shi Qinghai smiled. He knew what he wanted to ask. He shrugged and said, "When I first met you, I didn't know that you were so lucky to know Tai Ziyuan. I believe that Zhang Xiaomeng is the same. The reason why both of us became friends with you is probably because you always have a trustworthy temperament. Don't say such ridiculous things." Su Le shook his head sadly. "Why do you want me to be careful of her?" "Zhang Xiaomeng is just a very unprofessional girl," Shi Qinghai said. "The problem is that the people she serves are very professional people. Those people can use such an unprofessional girl to get what they want. My current situation is caused by them. And I'm afraid that you're also a thorn in their side." "You think that Senator Medellin is a traitor in the anti-government army?" Su Le looked at Shi Qinghai in surprise. Shi Qinghai smiled. His smile was full of uncertainty and self-mockery. "Didn't you see the recent news? It seems that this senator has already made connections with some forces in the Federation. Of course, no one will believe this inference of mine. Even the leader of Nanshui from Green Dragon Mountain and the citizens of the 4 states won't believe it. He was one of the most successful spies in the anti-government army." When he thought of this, he couldn't help but laugh at himself. When he had first thrown himself into this business, how could he have thought that he would be exposed in such a way? It seemed that it had been the same since ancient times. The enemy was always the cruelest inside. "What are you going to do next? Go back to S2 directly to Green Dragon Mountain?" Su Le looked at Shi Qinghai worriedly and asked softly, "Since you've already been exposed, there's no way you can stay in the Federation anymore." His whole family had died tragically because of the Federation's government's numbness. His teacher and boss had died under that white beam of light because of the Federation's shady dealings. His friends had been arrested and imprisoned by the government under false pretenses. He didn't know where they were now. Su Le didn't have a good impression of the government. So, whether it was Zhang Xiaomeng's true identity or Shi Qinghai's true identity, he wasn't afraid or conflicted at all. He was just shocked. Shi Qinghai looked at him. Ever since the day the HTD director fell from the building and died tragically in front of him, he had been on the run. The Federation Investigation Bureau had been secretly looking for him. The past few days of escaping had been very exciting, but he didn't want to recall it at all. After arriving in Shangye, he had hidden for more than 10 days. He was supposed to take advantage of the relaxation of the secret search and go directly to Harbor City to find the last contact left for him by the organization. However, just before he left, Shi Qinghai used the backdoor he had left in the Federation Investigation Bureau's intranet to hack into the other party's network. When he was about to look for some information, he unexpectedly found that someone was investigating Su Le. What made him even more alarmed was that the department investigating Su Le had a very high level of confidentiality. They directly bypassed the field office's authorization and quietly read all the information about Su Le in Linhai over the past year. If Shi Qinghai hadn't left a cute little program in the Linhai office's intranet, then no one in the Federation Investigation Bureau, including him, would have known that someone was investigating Su Le. It was also because of this reason that Shi Qinghai took the risk to contact Su Le. While on the run, any unnecessary contact or meeting could expose him to the government, but he still did it. There was no doubt that this choice required great courage. Just like how Su Le didn't hesitate to return to Linhai after he found out about what happened to him. The friendship between 2 drinking buddies wasn't just about the wine. "My single contact is dead. Now, it's very difficult for me to get in touch with the anti-government army in Green Dragon Mountain. Shi Qinghai said in a low voice, with my ability, as long as the Bureau of Proclamation doesn't care, the Federation's government department will have a hard time catching me. The key is, what are you going to do now? You said someone is investigating me? What's there to investigate? Su Li's eyebrows flew up again like flying knives as he asked in shock. The confidence in Shi Qinghai's words gave him great comfort. It seemed that he didn't need to change Mr. Shi's chip. But then, Shi Qinghai's serious warning made Su Li think of a lot of terrible things. There weren't many government departments that could bypass the Investigation Bureau's authority, but it was obvious that the first charter could easily do this. I just wanted to remind you, but I didn't expect you to come back. Shi Qinghai stared at his face and said, don't underestimate Tai Ziyuan's power, and don't refuse his help for the sake of face. If there is a problem in the future, you have to contact him first. Su Lu was silent, but his heart was already frozen by the ice and snow outside the car window. If it was really the omnipotent central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation that had noticed him, then even the Tai family couldn't do anything to help. At this moment, Shi Qinghai, who had been using the corner of his eye to look at the rear view screen, suddenly narrowed his eyes and stepped on the gas pedal to the maximum. The black car's wheels rolled up the ice and snow, and suddenly rushed forward. Shi Qinghai stared at the road calmly, and said to Su Lu, who was next to him, if you don't want that leg to be broken, put on your seatbelt. Motherfucker! Who's been watching me all this time? Shi Qinghai cursed angrily as he looked at the wide street behind him through the rear view screen. There were a few black cars that were chasing him at high speed. Those black cars were very familiar, they were the official cars of the Federation Investigation Bureau. Chapter 142. The Bureau of Proclamation only grants Level 5 access for 1 day. Inside the high-speed Federation Investigation Bureau car, a middle-aged official stared at the fleeing car with hawk-like eyes. The official pressed on his headset and listened carefully for a while. Then he turned to the small holographic screen on his wrist and issued an order to his subordinates, find out who your target is. He is a vicious terrorist. He is an outstanding soldier who graduated from a military academy. He knows the arrest process of the Investigation Bureau better than you do. So, don't be arrogant. Before entering the city, you must stop the car in front. If the other party resists, you are allowed to open fire. After issuing the order, the middle-aged official cursed angrily, those motherfuckers of the Bureau of Proclamation, they only gave me 1 day of access, and it's only level 5. Don't they know how dangerous that kid surnamed Sure is? Su Li's face was a little pale. The scenery outside the car window was moving backward at a terrifying speed. The automatic heating and de-icing system of the highway had already been turned on. Otherwise, if they were moving at this speed on ice and snow, their black off-road vehicle would have flipped over and died before the cars behind them could catch up. Shi Qinghai's face didn't have the slightest trace of nervousness except for the slight worry in his eyes. He licked his dry lips lightly, but he seemed a little excited. Do you know how to drive? He stared at the high-speed cars on the rear-view screen. No. Su Lu answered quickly without a trace of hesitation. He knew that in such a tense moment, any hesitation could lead to serious consequences. Do you dare to drive? Yes. This question and answer was wonderful and absurd. Probably only Su Lu and Shi Qinghai could come up with something like this. Su Lu didn't know why Shi Qinghai handed over the control of the car to him, but he could imagine that Shi Qinghai must need to free up his hands to deal with the black cars that were getting closer and closer. Shi Qinghai pulled on a rope that had been hanging beside the sun visor. With a loud crash, something in the back of the black off-road vehicle fell out. A large pile of rusty metal components fell on the road of Linhai State. The speed of these components made them heavy and dangerous as they flew everywhere on the road. The car at the front of the black motorcade was hit by an iron thallium that had just bounced off the ground. With a strange sound of metal cracking, the car bounced up from the ground and then rushed diagonally off the road, making a loud noise. The pursuing motorcade was hindered by these things on the road. After paying a heavy price of one car, Su Lu and Shi Qinghai's car pulled away from them. Open fire! The official's angry voice came from the convoy. The sharp sound of bullets whistling through the air suddenly cut across the road, startling countless pedestrians and birds in the forest. Taking advantage of this time, Shi Qinghai switched seats with Su Lu. He took out a long gun from the back seat and placed it at the back of the car. After a few shattering sounds, the glass of the back of the car was completely shattered. He narrowed his eyes and aimed at the pursuing cars. Calmly, even somewhat coldly, he began to pull the trigger. With a muffled bang, Shi Qinghai's shoulders shook. The front wheel of the car he had aimed at suddenly exploded. At high speed, the car lost control and crashed into the side of the road. The cold wind poured into the car, making it incomparably cold. Su Lu hid his body completely under the seat, avoiding the flying bullets. Although he had never driven a car before, when he was in Donglin, he had once followed Uncle Feng Yu to repair cars. He was very familiar with the driving system of a car. Moreover, for someone who could operate a mecha, driving a car was like playing with a toy. However, this toy was very dangerous. Su Lu focused all his attention on controlling the steering wheel and gears, avoiding the cars in front of him that had stopped because of the gunfight. He tried to increase the speed of the car as much as possible, trying to increase the distance between him and the pursuing cars behind. This was his first time driving a car, but his keen eyes and incomparably strong hand-eye coordination allowed him to control the car smoothly. He looked more like a racer. No, Su Lu's racer driving was even crazier. Because there was a U-shaped turn ahead, he did not seem to have any intention of letting go of the accelerator to slow down. In the instant before the turn, his left foot stomped hard on the accelerator and his right hand pulled hard on the handbrake, causing this civilian black off-road vehicle to drift dangerously on the slippery surface of the road. Just as it was about to hit the cliff at the turn, he straightened the car and continued to move forward fiercely. From the moment they were preparing to enter the turn to the moment they exited the turn, Su Lu did not let go of the accelerator. The tachometer was maintained at 4,500 RPM. Cold sweat had already covered his forehead. The bullets that hit the car from time to time and the strong wind that rushed in through the cracks made Su Lu feel unprecedentedly nervous and excited. Amidst the sound of the bullets, he roared loudly at Shi Qinghai behind him, "Throw down more of those things that are blocking the road, or else we won't be able to shake them off." Shi Qinghai had been calmly maintaining his aiming posture. He rarely pulled the trigger, but every time he pulled the trigger, the pursuing cars of the Federation Investigation Bureau would be reduced by one car. Hearing Su Lu's roar, he roared loudly in the wind. "Just now, it was like I was throwing an auxiliary fuel tank. I went to the junkyard last night. How much did you think it could hold? Bastard! It seems that we are going to die here today." Su Lu shouted loudly while nervously watching the situation on the road. His eyes and his hands were in perfect harmony at this moment. Everything he saw was organized into his mind in an extremely organized manner. Then, through the special channels in his body, the corresponding measures were transmitted to his three limbs. All the controls, without any unnecessary movements, without any hesitation, were extremely smooth, except for the foot that had been stepping on the accelerator all the time. Just like Su Lu, it was firm, unwavering, and determined not to move away. It was a perfect driving, a heroic driving, and a crazy driving. Although Shi Qinghai did not turn around, he knew how fast the car was going at this time. His face was slightly pale, and he shouted loudly, "Break into the city in front. In 3 minutes, the Investigation Bureau will set up the first line of interception." Su Lu's face was also extremely pale. Looking at the countless scenes that were retreating at high speed, he felt that he had returned to that extremely terrifying black dream. He clenched his teeth, raised his right hand, and forcefully turned the steering wheel with his left hand. He secretly prayed that the car would not overturn. When the Federation Investigation Bureau's team that was secretly pursuing Shi Qinghai arrived at the 7th toll station of Linhai, the number of cars had increased from 9 to 5. The middle-aged official with a particularly gloomy face got out of the car and looked at the broken railing in front of him. He looked back at his subordinates behind him and squeezed out a voice from between his teeth, contact the Bureau of Proclamation. Immediately locate where they are now. Contact the Traffic Control Bureau. Block the traffic in this area. At the same time, track the black off-road vehicle. Inform the team to be ready to assemble at any time. There was only debris on the ground and the stunned staff in the toll station. There was no trace of the black off-road vehicle. The officials of the Federation Investigation Bureau were very clear that the target they were chasing this time was an extremely excellent spy. Moreover, the other party had worked in the Investigation Bureau for many years and was very familiar with the internal communications and procedures of the Investigation Bureau. Therefore, before this operation, this batch of Investigation Bureau's team deliberately chose an unusual channel. Even if the heavy rifle that stretched out from the civilian off-road vehicle ruthlessly and coldly overturned several cars, the officials of the Federation Investigation Bureau still did not have the slightest intention to retreat. This was because if Shi Qinghai did not have this ability, he would not have been able to graduate from the first military academy as the top student. Moreover, he would not have been so favored in the Investigation Bureau. They were fully prepared for the upcoming difficulties and firmly believed that with the help of the Bureau of Proclamation's location, they would definitely be able to catch the other party. But the problem was the person driving the off-road vehicle. The middle-aged official's eyes were spitting fire. Looking at the seemingly endless road in front of him, he quickly issued orders to close the net one by one. But in his heart, he was thinking, was that a madman? Even if it was a Special Forces soldier who had received the most rigorous training, it was impossible to drive a civilian off-road vehicle at such a crazy speed. Thinking of the off-road vehicle that roared like a black ghost, the middle-aged official's heart was abnormally heavy. The other party did not look like he was running for his life at all, but more like he was giving up his life. Any normal person would subconsciously slow down at such a speed. This was an instinct. But that driver did not seem to have the word fear in his instincts. Forcefully changing gears, the handbrake was on, and the left foot stomped hard. The black civilian off-road vehicle that had been sliding at a high speed for 200 meters in neutral still maintained its high speed. Under the collective cooperation of the three braking methods, it slammed into the garage door with a loud bang. Shi Qinghai carried his backpack and walked out of the car with a pale face. He almost vomited. He was a well-trained professional. Previously, when faced with a hail of bullets, he would not be so frightened. But sitting in Su Li's car, he felt scared. "I don't want you to drive anymore." Shi Qinghai stared painfully at Su Li in the driver's seat. "I would rather be taken back and tortured by the Bureau of Investigation than risk my life with you." Su Li's face was also abnormally pale. His outstretched hands trembled slightly in the air and he was unable to leave the seat. He glanced at Shi Qinghai and said in a trembling voice, "Help me, I can't get out." Shi Qinghai thought that Su Li had finally been unable to withstand the fear and tension after experiencing the crazy racing and escape. He was so scared that he couldn't move. He opened the car door and unfastened the seatbelt that bound Su Li's body. He wanted to carry him out, but found that he could not move. He stared at Su Li's right foot, which was wrapped into a white cement pillar. In silence, his face began to become extremely colorful. Chapter 143. If the official from the Federation Investigation Bureau knew that the answer that puzzled him was actually just a small accident, he would definitely want to vomit blood and die. Su Li's right leg, which was sealed with medical plaster, played an absolutely important role in this escape. If it wasn't stuck between the seat and the gas pedal, turning into a steering wheel lock that was often seen in action movies, or some other hard object that was used to push the gas pedal. Since it was his first time driving a car, no matter how talented he was when it came to machinery, he wouldn't have been able to turn the civilian off-road vehicle into a crazy monster that cared about speed more than life. It would have been impossible for him to kill his way out of the encirclement of the FBI. Humans were naturally afraid of death. No one dared to step on the accelerator all the way and use the steering wheel and gear to cause trouble. The problem was that Su Li's right leg that stepped on the accelerator was no longer under his control. It was like a concrete pillar. A cunning rabbit had at least 3 nests for escape. Shi Qinghai, who had been a spy in the Federation Investigation Bureau for so long, was naturally no exception. At this time, the two of them were already far away from the civilian off-road vehicle that saved their lives and almost killed them. They disguised themselves as 2 ordinary Federation office workers and came to a small building on a street in Linhai. In a dark room, the Investigation Bureau changed the channel. Shi Qinghai carefully fiddled with a small receiver. Fortunately, they didn't have time to clean up the things I hid in the intranet. Su Lu was half lying on a bed. His face was unhealthily pale. After all, he was seriously injured in the Linhai gymnasium, and today he suffered both physical and mental torture. He felt like he couldn't bear it anymore, especially his stomach, which was very hungry. If the government people didn't follow me here, then how did they know where you were? Su Lu gently rubbed his waist and narrowed his eyes at Shi Qinghai. That's why I had to leave immediately. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have met you this morning. A trace of apology flashed across Shi Qinghai's beautiful face. He smiled bitterly and said, I thought that my colleagues in the Bureau of Proclamation wouldn't be able to find any trace of me. I didn't expect that those who wanted me dead would apply for the authority of the Bureau of Proclamation. Are you sure that the Bureau of Proclamation is helping the hunters locate them? Su Li's expression turned a little ugly. Ever since he had escaped from the Donglin region, the word he hated the most was the word charter. Just like what Uncle Feng Yu had lamented beside the mine pit back then, the law he hated the most in his life, other than the Wildlife Protection Act, was the first charter. Su Lu had been hunted down by the Bureau of Proclamation before, so he felt that the current situation was a little strange. He looked at Shi Qinghai and said, according to the charter I checked online, the Bureau of Proclamation shouldn't care about the actions of the anti-government forces. They should just monitor them according to the regulations. After thinking for a while, he said seriously, and if the Bureau of Proclamation is really involved in this hunt, I don't think we'll have time to sit here and chat. When they were escaping from Donglin, the special forces only needed 4 minutes and 12 seconds to accurately locate Feng Yu and Su Lu. At this time, the two of them were on the same planet as the central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation, so the transmission of information could be considered to be at the same time. So Su Lu understood why no one had broken into the house after so much time had passed. In fact, this was just because he didn't understand that the hunt that happened to him and his uncle was a rare first-order incident in the entire Federation. It required the use of the entire Federation's electronic surveillance network and a lot of resources to achieve real-time location. And today, Shi Qinghai and his uncle were facing only the authority of the Fifth Order. I don't know why the Bureau of Proclamation is involved, but I believe that my feeling is right. Otherwise, those guys wouldn't have been able to find me. Shi Qinghai's beautiful eyebrows revealed a hint of despair. He forced a smile and said, as for why no one has broken into the house at this time, I don't know. After all, I've never been hunted down by the entire Federation. Su Lu wanted to say that he had been hunted down before. Looking at the faint sadness between Shi Qinghai's eyebrows, he couldn't help but say, even if the Bureau of Proclamation is involved, it's not a big deal. I have a way to let you escape. Shi Qinghai didn't understand this sentence. Even if he had heard it, he would have thought that Su Lu was comforting him. The world was used to the omnipresence of the first charter. Even a professional like Shi Qinghai, who was good at hiding his powerful abilities under a romantic appearance, would not have the ambition to escape under the brilliance of the Bureau of Proclamation. He just didn't understand why the Bureau of Proclamation was involved in the Federation Investigation Bureau's search for anti-government military spies. The holographic screen of the wristwatch was playing the news. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai watched quietly, their faces gradually becoming dignified. The news was describing the chase and gunfight on the Linhai Ring Highway. At the same time, the spokesperson of the police system was interviewed by the television station and confirmed that the criminal being hunted down by the Federation Investigation Bureau and the police was one of the main suspects in the fire at the Jingzhou Electric Power Export Company yesterday. The authorities had classified this suspect as a terrorist. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai looked at each other and saw the complicated emotions in each other's eyes. Were you in Jingzhou yesterday? I was in Fart Prefecture yesterday. At this point, the situation was clear. The relevant departments of the Federation government, in order to end the shockwave brought to the government by the Linhai Gymnasium assassination as soon as possible, the traitor of the anti-government army and some other forces, in order to cover up some truth, found a way to work together at this moment. They perfectly cooperated with each other and hid the real crime of hunting down Shi Qinghai. In the name of a terrorist, they obtained the authority and cooperation of the Bureau of Proclamation. They had to catch Shi Qinghai or kill Shi Qinghai. The government can be so shameless. Su Le sighed with emotion. He immediately thought of Uncle Feng Yu's comments on the first charter many years ago. Yes, even if the central computer had the right starting point, no matter how powerful it was, and no matter how detailed the legal constraints of the charter were, it was still a machine in the hands of human beings. If the human who controlled it had a problem, it would naturally have a problem. The government has always been so shameless, but I didn't expect that such a big lineup was actually because of me. I feel very honored. Shi Qinghai was carefully listening to the movements in the earpiece while assembling the gun. Suddenly, he frowned and said, "They changed the channel. I didn't notice that there was something wrong with the conversation in the past few minutes. Maybe they have already arrived." After saying this, Shi Qinghai pulled out an ultra-thin holographic screen from beside him as if he was performing a magic trick. Some dark red light spots appeared on the holographic screen. Su Guang looked at this scene in a daze. He thought to himself, as expected of an agent, he always has such a high-tech device around him. The ultra-thin holographic screen seemed to be some kind of detection device, but Su Le had never seen it before. Looking at the units on the screen, it should cover a distance of 500 meters around the building. When Shi Qinghai chose this escape point, he should have installed a lot of surveillance equipment outside. They have already arrived, but there seems to be some other people. Shi Qinghai looked at the moving light spots on the holographic screen. He scratched his hair, making his meticulously oiled hair become messy as usual. He smiled and said, "I'm leaving, you go hide in the basement." I'm leaving, not the other way around. The Federation Investigation Bureau only used 20 minutes to find Shi Qinghai's most secret hiding place. This outstanding professional, under the glory of the first charter, really couldn't muster up too much courage. He smiled at Su Lu and said, "You are already stupid enough to come back to Linhai, but I don't think you are stupid enough to follow me to the Dead Sea." "I'm not stupid." Su Lu lowered his head, put the original number card that the staff of the Tai family gave him back into his phone, and calmly replied, "Although I haven't received the kind of professional training that you guys have, I have more experience than anyone in the Federation in dealing with the first charter." After saying this, Su Lu raised his left hand, and aimed the metal bracelet on his wrist at the back of Shi Qinghai's neck. However, in the next moment, Shi Qinghai's figure had already disappeared from the room. He jumped down from the balcony, leaving only Su Lu, who had crutches beside him and couldn't move freely. "It seems that you really don't have much confidence in me." Su Lu smiled, leaned on the metal crutches, and jumped down from the balcony after him. Shi Qinghai looked at Su Lu, who had landed beside him, dumbfounded. He tilted his head and praised, "First, you are really good, even a cripple can jump off a building. Second, you are really not afraid of death. But how am I going to escape with a cripple like you?" Su Lu smiled. At this time, he really didn't have the mood to bicker with him, nor did he have the time to express his gratitude. If the Bureau of Proclamation was tracking Shi Qinghai's chip, then after he left, he would naturally be safe in the basement. The Federation Bureau of Investigation wants to arrest you, but maybe there are also people who want to kill you. Su Lu thought back to the time when he was in Donglin, when the federal military launched an attack on the repair shop without warning. His heart felt heavy. They carefully walked through 2 streets. At the exit, the 2 of them were interrogated. They were wearing black suits and milky white headphones, and they couldn't wait to announce to the whole world that they were secret agents. "If you can avoid killing people, then don't kill people. I don't want you to really become a terrorist." Su Lu pulled down his cap, covering most of his face, and put the metal crutches back into the cylinder. He clung onto Shi Qinghai's shoulder, pretending to be a drunk man, and walked toward the intersection where the secret agents were standing. It's only 12:00. Isn't it a little too early to be drunk? Shi Qinghai lowered his head slightly and whispered in his ear, besides, I have so many guns on my back, even a fool can see it. That's your problem. Of all the things to learn, you just had to learn from the gorillas in the mountains. Don't forget, I was originally a member of the gorillas, but that cap of yours is quite unique. Where did you buy it? Jian Shui'er gave it to you. Who? Jian Shui'er, you didn't hear wrong, but this is a very long story. He walked in front of the secret agents of the Federation Bureau of Investigation, who were squinting their eyes and vigilantly watching the pedestrians. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai's meaningless conversation came to an abrupt end, and the two of them tacitly separated at the same time. Su Li's retractable crutches suddenly popped out and hit one of the secret agents in the middle of his forehead. At the same time, he fell in that direction and hit the back of the secret agent's head with the tip of his elbow in a strange posture. Chapter 144. In a small airport on the outskirts of Linhai. 3 helicopters painted in black were ready to take off. The strong wind blew the thin snow on the ground, making it flutter like catkins on the banks of the Rose River in early spring. However, the fully armed people next to the helicopters didn't have the time to be sad. Shui Naiyin, the director of the Black Eagle Security Company, stared coldly at the subordinates rushing from behind. He looked down at the time on his watch and said loudly, the cell phone signal has been located. The target is trying to escape from Linhai through the 3 blockades set by the Federation Investigation Bureau. According to the analysis, the target can only break through 2 blockades at most. Our mission is to intercept the target before the 3rd blockade. Shui Naiyin had been retired from the military for 6 years, but he had been performing paramilitary tasks in the Black Eagle Security Company. His words were still as concise and powerful as a military officer. Last time in the gymnasium, you lost all your face. This time, you must earn it back. Shui Naiyin stared into his subordinate's eyes and said fiercely. He added a sentence to himself in his heart, especially in front of the young master's friend. If it wasn't for that person last time, perhaps he would have already committed suicide by swallowing a gun. Change equipment. Following the order, Black Eagle, one of the most powerful security companies in the Federation, began to change equipment. A box was opened, and all kinds of spray equipment were moved over. The combatants of the security company wore bulletproof vests with the police logo, and the 3 black helicopters were quickly sprayed with the logo of Linhai Police Headquarters. Let's go. Shui Naiyin ordered, stepped on the scattered snow and boarded the helicopter. The dark underground parking lot brought a strong sense of uneasiness to Su Lu. He sat in the passenger seat of the small truck, looking at the continuous countdown on the screen in his hand, and said in a hoarse voice, 15 minutes until the next location. After escaping from the small building, the two of them had been intercepted several times by the Federation Investigation Bureau. Through the calculation of time and Shi Qinghai's understanding of the Investigation Bureau's execution power, Su Lu roughly figured out the time needed for each location. The small truck was hit by a sniper rifle earlier and almost capsized. The exploded metal pieces flew everywhere, and the situation was very dangerous. At this time, Shi Qinghai got out of the sedan beside the truck and nodded at Su Lu, indicating that it was done. It's all right. Su Lu exhaled and wiped away the trace of blood on the corner of his eyebrows. He jumped out of the truck with the help of his metal crutches and got into the car with a new owner. He said with lingering fear, it should only be a sequence 5. Otherwise, we would have died long ago. Shi Qinghai lit a cigarette. His handsome face was full of exhaustion. He had been on the run for less than an hour, but he was already mentally and physically exhausted. It was even more painful than running for the past month. No matter where he hid, it wouldn't be long before the electronic surveillance network that covered the entire Federation would receive the data from the chip on the back of his neck and feed back his position to the Federation's Investigation Bureau that was in charge of pursuing him. There was really no hope for this kind of escape. You know a lot. Shi Qinghai looked at Su Lu and said very seriously, you surprised me. If you had believed in my ability to pick locks, the time it took to get rid of that sedan could have been much faster. Su Lu said, in the end, I don't know you, and you don't know me well enough. If you really want to live, you have to believe me. I don't have the time to listen to your nonsense. Shi Qinghai obviously didn't believe that there was anyone in the world who could remove the chip on the back of his neck. Even if an extremely sophisticated surgery could do this, how could he survive in the Federation without the chip? He smiled and said to Su Lu, although we don't know each other's secrets, at least we're in a life and death situation right now. He suddenly frowned and said in disgust, but I think this is very shameful. Why do you want to die with me? I also think it's very strange. Why did you come back to Linhai to see me when you had clearly escaped? Su Lu said, that's because you knew someone was investigating me, so you wanted to warn me. Speaking of which, it's really quite boring. No wonder Tai Ziyuan kept trying to stop me from coming back. Even if I didn't come back, I would have been caught by the Federation in the end, unless I had the ability to escape to the Great Triangle. Shi Qinghai took a deep drag on his cigarette. He had already thrown away the empty pack. He glanced at Su Lu and handed the remaining half of the cigarette to him. But you're different. If you were still lying in the general hospital, these things wouldn't have a damn thing to do with you. Su Lu took the half of the cigarette and took a deep drag. Then he found that the mouth of the cigarette was wet and couldn't help but feel a little disgusted. I have countless women and colleagues in my life, but the ones who really care about me are probably that teacher of mine and you. Shi Qinghai's smile was a little dim. Teacher is already dead. I was hoping that you could survive. After I died, at least there would be someone to clean my grave for me, and someone to arrange a bouquet of flowers for me on the anniversary of my death. I also have very few friends, so I can't lose any of them. Su Lu used 2 fingers to clamp the already short cigarette butt and took a deep drag. He almost choked and coughed. As for why I came, you don't believe me, Tai Ziyuan doesn't believe me. I think Jian Shuier, who helped me escape, also doesn't believe that I can really help you. Su Lu did have the ability to help Shi Qinghai escape from the Bureau of Proclamation. This was the biggest secret in his life, and it was hidden in the metal bracelet on his wrist. When his friend was in a desperate situation, Su Lu certainly wouldn't be stingy with sharing this secret. It was just that he didn't have the opportunity to change Shi Qinghai's ID chip when they were in the small building. Later on, they were in a hurry to escape, so he really didn't have the time. Su Lu had changed his ID chip before, so he knew that the intense pain, as if the electric current was passing through the body, was really unbearable. It was very likely that the person involved would fall into a coma. In fact, he had been unconscious for several hours that rainy night. If Shi Qinghai had fallen into a coma at this time, and his leg was lame, he really didn't have the confidence to escape from the government's arrest. So he changed the SIM card back to the original one and waited silently and nervously. You really know Jian Shuier? Shi Qinghai subconsciously glanced at the baseball cap on Su Li's head. Only then did he notice that this baseball cap was indeed a little too small and cute. He shrugged in disbelief. Or is this the coldest joke I'm going to tell before I die? We'll talk about that later. I just want to explain once, why I want to go back to Linhai, and why I want to help you. Su Lu threw the cigarette butt out of the window. His nose twitched slightly, and he said with a calm face, from the assassination attempt on Tai Ziyuan in the gymnasium, to the death of your superior, to you being hunted down. Everything was caused by Zhang Xiaomeng. Whether she did it intentionally or not, it's still her responsibility. Zhang Xiaomeng is my woman. She made a mistake, so I want to help her solve it, said Su Lu. Shi Qinghai tilted his head and looked at him. After a while, he said, I just realized today that you're like a civil rights hero who lived in the early days of the constitutional era, the embodiment of justice. The problem is that it's disgusting. You're just a male animal whose cerebral cortex has been affected by the concentration of alcohol. Hearing the profanity, Su Lu smiled. He thought to himself that his cerebral cortex was indeed abnormal. He stared at the hologram on Shi Qinghai's wrist and began to count down. 30 seconds left. Shi Qinghai lightly stepped on the accelerator and stared intently at the exit of the underground parking lot. He pointed at a direction on the hologram and said, "Confirm whether this road is clear or not." Su Le looked at the map on the hologram and said, "No problem." The stolen car found a road in the middle of several streets and alleys. It turned into a cloud of dust and broke through the roadblock set up by the police. Once again, it rushed into the streets of Linhai City. Countless police cars and black station wagons, which were very characteristic of the Federation Investigation Bureau, began to chase after the car. The sirens were long and loud. At this time, only the traffic monitoring system of the police headquarters in Linhai City was enough to ensure the success of the chase. They no longer needed the help of the Bureau of Proclamation's location. This is a slow suicide. Shi Qinghai suddenly turned the steering wheel and avoided a truck in front of him. He said loudly, "As a professional, I shouldn't listen to you and drive away. I can find a random house and point a gun at a beautiful woman as a hostage. I can hide for half a month." Su Le replied, "You forgot the location of the Bureau of Proclamation." Shi Qinghai's face changed slightly. He cursed loudly, "Fuck the first charter." On the parallel streets, police cars with flashing lights had begun to appear. From time to time, fierce figures could be seen from the corners of the streets. Shi Qinghai took a deep breath and focused on the front. He said, "I'm ready to fight and then die. If you can't create any more miracles, you can get out of here. I'm also waiting for a miracle." Su Le held the phone tightly. Sweat gradually seeped out. At this time, the phone rang. It showed a strange number. "I'm Su Le. My surname is Shui. How can I help you?" Su Le smiled. He turned his head and told Shi Qinghai the coordinates. The two quickly found the street indicated by the coordinates on the hologram map. Shi Qinghai drove the car and made a forced turn. He barely got rid of the two police cars that were closest to him and sped toward the street. This was a long straight street with no forks. At the end of the street, there was a faint buzzing sound. The air seemed to be vibrated by something. 3 black, matte helicopters appeared at the end of the road. At the edge of the helicopters' cabins, heavily armed policemen vigilantly scanned the street below. They aimed the black rotary barrels in their hands at the whole street. The miniature Darlin gun barrels could turn a car into a hornet's nest with just one sweep. The rotary barrels with a metallic luster were still so gloomy and cold under the noon sun. "Police!" Shi Qinghai's eyes suddenly became very calm. He stared at the horrible existence that suddenly appeared above the street. Under such powerful firepower, he was too lazy to make any evasive movements. Chapter 145. 3 black helicopters painted with the words, "Police Headquarters," hovered up and flew along the streets of Linhai toward the horizon. Looking down from the cabin, one could see the chaotic sound of sirens everywhere, the roaring police cars, and the chaos that still hadn't subsided. Entering the police station's intranet, accurately grasping the other party's communication, and successfully disguising themselves. The very professional Black Eagle Security Company had no difficulty in rescuing 2 people in this city. Of course, this operation was still very risky. If it was discovered that the Black Eagle Security Company had impersonated the Federation Police, it would still be difficult to face the wrath of the Federation government with the company's background. Therefore, the 3 black helicopters retreated very neatly, leaving only a small team responsible for disrupting the public's hearing. Accompanied by the sound of the wind above the streets, no traces were left behind. Su Le narrowed his eyes and looked at the buildings under his feet that swept past from time to time. His mood was slightly complicated. This was too much like a scene in a movie, and not like something that happened in reality. He glanced at Shi Qinghai's watch and said to the director surnamed Shui beside him, "We are in the charter's positioning. The next time the Federation Investigation Bureau gets the coordinates will be about 5 minutes later." Hearing this, Shui Nian's face slightly darkened. He didn't expect that this mission would be so troublesome. Although the security company team he led was more professional than the federal military, he didn't have any confidence in escaping the tracking of the Federation's electronic monitoring network. Although the target was located in a helicopter moving at high speed, the Bureau of Proclamation's computer positioning could completely ignore this level of movement. "It should be the fifth sequence," said Su Lu. Shui Nain's expression eased a little. He immediately picked up the satellite communicator in his hand and reported the information to the director at the base, asking the higher-ups to find a solution. The fully armed people in the cabin vigilantly watched any movement under the helicopter. Professional staff were monitoring the cooperation between the Linhai Police Headquarters and the Federation Investigation Bureau. From time to time, they released identification signals to confuse the other party's monitoring system. These employees of the Blackhawk Security Company had their faces covered, and their bodies revealed a cold aura. The guns in their hands were also the most advanced weapons of the federal military. Shi Qinghai, who had been silent since he boarded the helicopter, coldly observed all the details in the cabin. Looking at the hands of the staff of Blackhawk Security Company, a faint self-deprecating smile flashed across his eyes. Just like what George Carlin had said, the 7 great families of the Federation would always be above the law in certain aspects because they had more resources, more wealth, and more information. Shi Qinghai's beautiful eyebrows furrowed as he thought to himself, the people in the Federation have always thought that the Blackhawk Security Company has the backing of the Ministry of National Defense. Who would have thought that this extremely powerful company is almost equivalent to the private army of the Tai family? The noise in the cabin was very loud. Shi Qinghai no longer stared at Shui Nain, who was nervously communicating with some people. Although he very keenly judged that this security director surnamed Shui must have been a powerful figure in the federal army back then, he didn't want to care about this right now. He turned around, grabbed Su Li's clothes, and approached his ear. In the roaring noise, he asked very seriously in a loud voice, "Do you really know Jian Shuier?" Su Li's expression suddenly froze. He didn't expect that at such a tense moment, Shi Qinghai couldn't forget about the peaked cap and the national idol under the escort and cover of the Blackhawk Security Company. 3 black helicopters, like 3 ghosts, swaggered through the layers of Federation Investigation Bureau and Linhai Police Headquarters encirclement, took Shi Qinghai and Su Lu out of the city, flew about 40 kilometers in the southwest direction, and slowly landed on a simple tarmac. It was believed that in the conclusion that the sudden appearance and departure of these 3 helicopters would definitely reveal something, but whether or not it could be traced back to the Blackhawk Security Company depended on how much effort the Federation government was willing to spend on this matter and how deep the investigation was. After getting off the helicopter, the fully armed bodyguards surrounded Su Lu and Shi Qinghai to change cars. Along the way, except for Shui Nain who occasionally whispered a few words to Su Lu, the entire motorcade seemed to be unusually silent and calm. Shi Qinghai had been watching coldly from the sidelines, and had the most direct impression of the true strength of the mysterious 7 families of the Federation. After continuously speeding for an hour, the motorcade arrived at a base on the outskirts of Shangye. From the outside, this base looked like a very ordinary synthetic food factory, but in fact, it was one of the bases that the Tai family distributed in the major states of the Federation. In a lounge, Su Lu and Shi Qinghai restocked on some food and water. The door of the room was pushed open, and a man of about 30 years old calmly walked in. He walked to the front of the 2 and said softly, "I just received news that the Bureau of Proclamation has stopped tracking your location." Although the person who walked in was not Tai Ziyuan, he was presumably an important staff member of the Tai family. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai stood up from the sofa to welcome him. After all, it was thanks to this person that they were able to successfully escape from the government's pursuit. However, Shi Qinghai looked at the face of the man of about 30 years old and slightly frowned. He said, "Thank you, but I didn't expect that you are now working for the Tai family." Su Lu realized that Shi Qinghai knew the person in front of him. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised, but his character made him keep silent and didn't ask curiously. The man looked at Shi Qinghai and smiled. He said, "I am working for the Shou Shu Foundation. Of course, in a sense, I am also working for the Tai family. This is not much different from working for the Federation." He turned to Su Lu and smiled slightly, as if he knew the doubts in Su Li's mind. He introduced himself, "My name is Shinli. I graduated from the first military academy, and now I am a senior manager of the Black Eagle Security Company. I am in charge of today's operation. Shi Qinghai is my junior, so he knows me." Shi Qinghai looked at him quietly and said, "After you graduated, there was no trace of you. We all thought that you were sent to the West Woods by the Ministry of Defense to carry out a secret mission. We didn't expect you to be in the Tai family. I am very curious, did you confirm your job before you entered the military academy? I am in a targeted training program. You know my family's financial situation, so I can only go to the military academy, which is free of charge." Shinli smiled and said, "As for when I confirmed my job after graduation, this is not important, just like I won't ask when you became a spy for the anti-government army." Shi Qinghai shrugged and said, "I am also poor, so I can only go to the military academy. George Carlin said that the poor have the most courage to change society. I don't want to disturb your reminiscing, and I am also very curious why the best students from the most famous military academy in the Federation didn't join the army." Su Lu looked at Shinli and said, "But I think, what we need to think about now is not this." Shinli nodded slightly to Su Lu and said, "We will arrange for you to go back to the general hospital right away. The boarding record of the airport has been erased. If there is a government official in the future, you will stay in the ward for 2 days." He added, "As for Jian Shuier, it should be the young master who went to ask Miss Jian in person, so she won't say anything." For some reason, this senior manager of the Blackhawk Security Company was more respectful to Su Lu than to Shi Qinghai. Although it was not obvious, it was always there. Shinli turned his head, looked at Shi Qinghai and said, "The route back to S2 has been confirmed. If you want, you can leave now." "How do I leave?" Shi Qinghai was a spy for the anti-government army, so he did not like to deal with the powerful people in the Federation, but he knew that he owed Shinli a big favor today. Especially with Shinli's previous words, which could make the Bureau of Proclamation terminate the tracking of his location in advance. Even with the power of the Tai family, he was afraid that even with the power of the Tai family, it would not be a small price to pay. "Illegal immigration," Shinli said with a smile. "This should be the most familiar way of transportation for people like you." Shi Qinghai heard the hidden meaning in this sentence and could not help but frown slightly. He said, "Maybe in the near future, you will be the ones who need to be illegal." Shinli left the lounge, and the smell of gunpowder in the last 2 sentences of the conversation disappeared. Su Lu looked at Shi Qinghai silently and said, "Since you know each other, why are you still so rude? We used to have a good relationship." Shi Qinghai said, "But since we have embarked on a different path, it is natural that we cannot go back to how we used to be. The Tai family is not the Federation government." Su Lu said with a headache, "Even if you are a soldier of the anti-government army, after all, it was them who helped us today. The goal of the anti-government army is to overthrow the control of the 7 major families and those shameless politicians on the Federation." Shi Qinghai closed his eyes slightly and said, "You have seen what happened today. The Tai family is not the Federation government, but it is a pair of rabbits that are born together with the Federation government. Didn't Councilman Pabre just reach a peace agreement with you? The temporary peace is because both sides need each other's benefits." Shi Qinghai smiled and said, "When there is no need for each other in the future, the peace will naturally be gone." At this moment, a voice rang out in the quiet lounge. The voice was full of mockery. "That's why I've never tried to seek peace. Just as you said, our goal is to eliminate you traitors." A screen hung down from the ceiling of the lounge. On the screen was Tai Ziyuan's slightly pale face, and his calm eyes were full of pressure and disdain. Chapter 146. The Federation had many historical sites, but there was no such thing as a pyramid. If this society also had a pyramid, then people like Tai Ziyuan would undoubtedly be one of those people who stood at the very top of the pyramid and looked at the scenery. His family background, the education he received since childhood, or more accurately speaking, the class he belonged to, which was also the position he sat on, it was destined that this young and proud successor of the Tai family would only snort in disdain and feel incomparable hatred towards George Carlin's set of theories. In Tai Ziyuan's eyes, the group of anti-government forces coiled around the S2 Green Dragon Mountain area did not hesitate to use violence to destroy the stable structure of the Federation for a set of illusory political theories, for the so-called dogs hit justice. Facing the threat of the Empire's powerful military, the existence of the anti-government forces not only forced the Federation government to expend a large amount of attention, it also wasted countless taxpayer dollars. More importantly, it created a gap in the Federation society. If the people's hearts were divided, how would they face the Empire's invasion? What was the difference between this type of behavior and those traitors who betrayed the interests of the Federation? If possible, Tai Ziyuan was willing to have the Federal Army sweep clean all of the armed forces in Green Dragon Mountain in the shortest amount of time possible. However, decades of history proved that without the help of the First Charter, the complex terrain of Green Dragon Mountain, as well as the chaotic electronic turbulence atmosphere that was extremely unsuitable for large-scale mechanical warfare, was enough to help those stubborn anti-government forces who lacked resources but refused to admit defeat resist the Federal Army's spring offensive. It could only be done slowly. Therefore, when the number 2 figure of the anti-government forces braved the enormous danger and met with Tai Ziyuan at the Double Moon Festival Ball, Tai Ziyuan did not impulsively hand the other person over to the government. Instead, he forcefully suppressed the hostility in his heart and very rationally facilitated Pabre's trip to Green Dragon Mountain. However, Tai Ziyuan's attitude towards the anti-government forces in Green Dragon Mountain had never changed, never softened. If the situation permitted, if he truly stood on the political stage of the Federation, perhaps he would be even more unyielding than the officers of the 2nd Military Region and the Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Defense who committed suicide. On the screen, Tai Ziyuan's thin and pale face showed a hint of mockery. He said, "I saved you this time, not because I agree with your ideals, but because you are the middleman in this settlement agreement. You know too many details, and those details require you to go back to S2 to carry out. In addition, I don't like the fact that some people in the government treat the assassination in the gymnasium as a game. My dignity doesn't allow me to be kept in the dark. I don't want to see any scapegoats they find die. Of course, if Sulu hadn't returned to Linhai, maybe I wouldn't care about your life or death." There was not much to remember about this conversation, and it was soon over. But before it ended, 3 young men with completely different identities and positions did a math problem. For example, how many lives did Tai Ziyuan owe to Sulu? How many lives did Shi Qinghai owe to Tai Ziyuan? How many lives did Shi Qinghai owe to Tai Ziyuan? And how many lives did he return to Sulu? As a result, the most silent Sulu became the biggest creditor. That night, Shi Qinghai left the base. He did not accept the arrangement of the Black Eagle Security Company to take the stowaway Nearstar spaceship to S2. Instead, he quietly disappeared into the darkness again. As long as the Bureau of Proclamation no longer tracked him down, it was believed that this excellent spy would be able to find his own organization again, and silently lurk in order to do something for the teacher who died tragically in front of him. The next day, Sulu returned to the 1st Military General Hospital in the southwest region of Jingzhou. Tai Ziyuan still had some things to deal with in the capital special district. He said that he would see him in 10 days, and told Sulu to wait in the hospital. It seemed that another long talk was about to begin. The familiar courtyard, the familiar smell of medicine, and the snow-white ceiling, Sulu had been silent. He did not have much literary spirit to worry about whether the struggle between the several camps in the Federation would bring some kind of fatalistic tragedy to his friends. Literary spirit always made short sentences become long sentences, and he was not used to this. He was used to thinking very directly. Everyone had their own life. Whether it was Tai Ziyuan or Shi Qinghai's life, in his eyes, they were all too strange. It was not something that he could touch or want to touch. He had too many things to worry about, whether it was the disguised chip behind his neck, the gloomy and terrible black dream, or the fresh images that he could now skillfully reflect in his eyes. These were enough to make him restless. However, he still calmly rested and ate. Occasionally, he would think about his trip to Linhai and comfort himself. If he had not returned to Linhai, Tai Ziyuan would definitely not have used his family's power to help Shi Qinghai escape. It seemed that a small figure like him could still play some role in this big era, even if it was very marginal and insignificant. Most of the time, he missed Zhang Xiaomeng. He thought about Zhang Xiaomeng, the girl who he met like a green duckweed in a stream and disappeared like a dewdrop in autumn. Where was she now? What was she doing? Was the assassination on New Year's Day really organized by such a delicate and fairy-like girl? Was her pair of red devil horns still in her luggage? Shi Qinghai said that his thoughts had been controlled by the intensity of his lust, but Su Lu did not admit this. He only thought of Zhang Xiaomeng out of habit because in this world, there was only one girl of the opposite sex that he could think of. Moreover, this was the girl with whom he had once shared happy days and deep conversations. Su Lu did not even want to think about the role that Zhang Xiaomeng might have played in this whole incident. He was just a little worried that under the pressure of the Federation government's investigation, the power behind her would abandon her like how it had treated Shi Qinghai. He had sincerely asked Tai Ziyuan to help investigate her, but he still found nothing. Just as he was about to become sick from his longing and worry, Su Lu received a phone call. The girl's voice on the other end of the phone was incomparably light and incomparably sad, like the dark clouds floating in the late winter sky of Linhai. It was a little high up, but also a little heavy. It was like she was on the other side of the mountain, hearing voices but not seeing people. It was me who told them that you might have gone to the concert with Tai Ziyuan. Su Lu held the phone in silence. After a long time, he said, "You didn't know that they wanted to kill Tai Ziyuan?" "I didn't know. I thought that I was doing the right thing, but now I realize how childish I was." The girl's voice was incomparably lonely and self-deprecating. "Where are you now? Are you in danger?" "I'm very safe, but it seems that some people are investigating me, so I am preparing to leave." Hearing this, Su Lu was silent for a long time. He knew that it was definitely the Tai family investigating Zhang Xiaomeng. With Tai Ziyuan's personality, if it was really Senator Macklin who told the Hawks in the Department of Defense about the concert, he would definitely not let go of Zhang Xiaomeng, because only through Zhang Xiaomeng could he get evidence to nail Senator Macklin down. "You still want to go back to that senator?" "No, I just want to do something more practical." "You know yourself that you are a very childish person, so why do you still want to go?" "There has to be some improvement. I am a normal person. I can't understand how people like you think, and I don't know what is worth sacrificing human emotions, even if it is a very noble idea. I don't think it is worth sacrificing those things that shouldn't be sacrificed. I'm not only referring to what happened between you and me, but also a lot of things, like life, like justice. Maybe you will ask me what justice is, but in my opinion, justice is doing the right thing." "What is the right thing to do?" "Something that can make one feel at ease, not bullying the weak, not harming innocent people. It should be like this, right?" The usually silent Su Lu held the phone tightly and said a lot of words. In the end, he said word by word, "I've said before, no matter how great a goal is, if the process to achieve it is dirty and ugly, then it will be dirty and ugly. I will remember what you said, and I will do the same in the future," Zhang Xiaomeng answered seriously on the other end of the phone. In Su Li's small eyes, there was a flash of uncontrollable sadness. He said slowly, "I have an uncle who once asked me why men and women always like to buy 2 pairs of rings when they get married. That's because rings as big as diamonds, girls like to wear them to show off, but they can't do anything with them. Actually, I don't have high expectations for life. Before this happened, my biggest dream was to buy you a big ring and let you wear it everywhere to show off. Also, I'm very good at cooking, I'm very good at doing housework, you can always wear it and don't need to change. Now it looks like I don't have to spend money to buy a ring." Su Lu lay on the bed and said softly into the phone, "Take care of yourself, don't be as naive as before. Woman, goodbye." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and then Zhang Xiaomeng's voice came, "Goodbye, man." In a corner of the waiting room at Jingzhou's Xinza spaceport. "That man of yours can be called Saint Su Lu. An uncle with a wretched face, but his face was full of love. He looked at the silent girl beside him and comforted her, "You are the future of this business. No matter how naive and childish you are, no matter how much damage you cause, as long as you face it bravely, it will become a mature experience for you." "I know, I just feel very sorry for him." Zhang Xiaomeng raised her face, took off her black-rimmed glasses, and wiped away her tears. She smiled stubbornly and said, "And if he really likes me, in a few days, he will be sad again. The Tai family can't find any evidence, and I can't find any evidence either. Your words can't be used as evidence." The uncle smiled and said, "In the Federation's territory, I can't do anything to that senator for now. I believe that your passenger number has fallen into his hands." 6 days later, the Federation's news channel broadcasted a piece of news. A spaceship flying from Shinza spaceport to Region S2 failed to operate due to the aging circuit and crashed to the ground. All the passengers in the spaceship were killed. Chapter 147. According to the passenger number, the girl, who was supposed to be sitting in the 4L open space transfer cabin, was now sitting in a medium-sized bus that used old-fashioned energy and had a pungent smell. She was on her way to the military area of Green Dragon Mountain. The middle-aged man with a wretched face was still sitting next to her. Zhang Xiaomeng looked at the primitive scenery outside the window and was silent for a long time. She didn't know if she was thinking about her naivety in the past, or if she was thinking about what kind of impact the news of her death would bring to her parents in Linhai and Su Lo. The old-fashioned bus kept moving up and down on the mountain road. The middle-aged man's face was covered with a straw hat, but he seemed to enjoy the rhythm. He was very familiar with the roads that surrounded the 4 states. Even if he closed his eyes, he knew where the bus was going. Maybe he was a little thirsty. The middle-aged man took off his straw hat and drank a mouthful of water from the water bottle that he always carried with him. Only then did he notice the stunned expression of the girl next to him. The slightly messy bangs on her forehead were mixed with the dust and sweat of the mountain area. She looked a little messy. There was a faint sadness on the girl's rosy face. He quietly looked at the young face and smiled slightly. He had been dealing with people his whole life. That was why he dared to enter the Double Moon Festival Ball alone last year and negotiate with the representatives of the Federation's powerful class face to face. He was very good at reading people, so he was very satisfied with Zhang Xiaomeng's current performance. A young person who was loyal to her beliefs and had suffered a huge setback would mature quickly and become an indispensable new force in a great cause in the future. The future of the Revolutionary Army would depend on these young people. The wretched middle-aged man sighed softly in his heart. Zhang Xiaomeng noticed that he had woken up. She lowered her eyes slightly and asked softly, "If I were to die, what would happen to the Bureau of Proclamations files?" Being able to think of this problem proves that you have made a lot of progress in the direction of professionalism. The middle-aged man smiled and said, "No one can change the data of the computer in the Bureau of Proclamation, but there is always a link when the data reaches the government. As long as there is a link, there will be people. As long as there is someone, there will be a way. I am an old man who has a special way of dealing with people. Why did you personally arrange for my departure?" Zhang Xiaomeng looked at him. He was the second most powerful person in the anti-government army. How could he risk coming to S1 just because of her? Although she knew some things about Senator Macklin, it was still not enough to prove anything. A traitor has appeared in the upper echelons of the organization, seriously harming our cause. But as I've told you before, I can't change everyone's opinion of that councilman. After all, to a certain extent, he represents the public image of our mountain comrades in the Federation. It's just that I feel that you're innocent in this matter. You come from a good background, but because of your kind nature, you've developed sympathy for Green Dragon Mountain. We should be grateful to a young man like you, and not watch a girl die in a plot of betrayal." At this point, a faint sadness flashed between the middle-aged man's eyebrows. For his ideals and beliefs, he had struggled for many years in the Federation. However, the current situation was becoming more and more worrying. The completely unequal resources, information, and armed forces made it so that the anti-government army could only struggle at death's door in front of the Federal Army. Although more and more ordinary people in the Federation were influenced by George Carlinism and chose to sympathize with the anti-government army, but, as Macklin walked out of the mountains and officially stepped onto the political stage, most of those people's hearts also turned to him, who claimed to be a non-violent advocate. The world in the mountains was about to become an abandoned world. He was an extremely outstanding intelligence leader, but he was not an outstanding political leader. He understood the undercurrents in the committee, but he could not quell them. After all, although Macklin's advocacy was suspected of being a capitulationist, in a difficult situation, and in the background of the Federation government's deliberate conciliation, it was very attractive. In order to contend with the forces of Macklin's faction, the leader of the anti-government army, Nan Shui, had to temporarily give up on the armed struggle and instead seek cooperation with certain forces in the Federation. That was why he came to the Federation, why there was the Double Moon Festival Ball, why there was the cooperation with the Tai family, and why there was the solemn expression on Senator Prabble's face when he walked down the gangway of the transport plane. The middle-aged man's eyebrows were deeply furrowed. The summary of information from all sides, especially the confession of the girl beside him, pointed to the source of the information about the assassination in the Linhai City Gymnasium, as well as the person behind the scenes who tried to frame the anti-government army's intelligence system after the incident, thus destroying the reconciliation agreement between Pabre and Green Dragon Mountain. It was Senator Macklin, or rather, Senator Macklin. However, he did not have any evidence. Just based on Zhang Xiaoming's confession alone, it would never be able to shake the highly respected Macklin's lofty position in the committee and in the hearts of the people in the 4 states surrounding the mountains. What made him feel even more worried was that Macklin was not stupid. His political wisdom and experience were extremely rich. Could it be that this senator did not understand that if the armed forces of Green Dragon Mountain were really destroyed, then the last thing he relied on to gain a foothold in the Federation's political arena would also disappear? The struggle of political lines was one thing, but after all, both sides were rooted in the same land. If even the land they had a foothold on was burned to a crisp, then no one would be able to take root and sprout. This problem was too profound to be thought through clearly. The middle-aged man looked at Zhang Xiaoming, who was deep in thought beside him, and said with a trace of pity, "For me, there is another very important reason why I let you follow by my side to learn and prepare for the future. That is your relationship with Su Lu." Zhang Xiaoming looked at him in surprise. She did not understand the importance of her relationship with Su Lu. Her eyebrows gradually squeezed together. She took a deep breath and said seriously, "I will not hurt him again, and I will not agree to use him. Don't worry." The middle-aged man had already retracted his gaze. He began to read the magazine in his hand with great interest. He seemed to be talking to himself, but also seemed to be telling Zhang Xiaoming. He said, "Su Lu is a person who sympathizes with us and is emotionally inclined toward us. This can be confirmed from the details of the past few days. As long as it is a person like this, we will have to fight for. Furthermore, he is someone who can influence Tai Ziyuan's choice. Perhaps it will be a year, perhaps it will be 5 years, or even longer. As long as you can influence him, it will be worth the wait." The magazine in his hand seemed to be some kind of weekly news, but in reality, on the page was a very detailed summary of information. The information on this page was all the details of Su Li's arrival at Linhai University. This number 2 figure in the anti-government army, the most successful intelligence chief in the 37 constitutions, quietly looked at Su Li's file. He thought calmly in his heart, possibility is the most important foundation for the development of any business. And Su Lu, this seemingly insignificant person, seemed to have more possibilities than any of the people I met on this trip to the Federation. How did Su Lu get to know Tai Ziyuan? The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes slightly. His fingers lightly stroked the edge of his straw hat. For the S2 anti-government army, for those who paid attention to all the subtle movements around the Tai family heir, this was a mystery. From the file, Su Lu, a retired soldier with no family or friends, would not have had the opportunity to get close to Tai Ziyuan in Yue University. If it is really because of H1, then how did Su Lu have the authority to enter H1? If Su Lu can really enter H1, then the black mecha that suddenly appeared during the visit to the first military academy, was it Tai Ziyuan who was controlling it, or was it Su Lu who was controlling it? If it was Su Lu who was controlling it, where did he learn to control it? The number 2 leader of the anti-government army smiled, quickly organizing and analyzing the information in his mind. He had been dealing with people his whole life, and was an old man who had a special way of dealing with people. As the anti-government army was forced to enter a low point, he had already set his sights on the future, on the young man who was still very insignificant now. At this time, Zhang Xiaomeng had already turned her head to the side, staring blankly at the scenery outside the window. Her eyes gradually became moist. She missed him, but was strong enough to not miss him. Su Li's injuries were not completely healed, but he no longer required 24-hour intensive care. Those unnecessary medical equipment had long been removed from his bed. The specialists at the first military general hospital had also confirmed that his epilepsy was caused by external pressure. It was a non-genetic epilepsy, and the abnormal electrical discharge of the cerebral cortex would not cause substantial damage to his body and brain. Therefore, he moved out of the ward and moved to the quieter sanatorium at the back of the general hospital. The living facilities here were more complete. Steam rose from the hot springs between the green trees. If it was not summer in the southern hemisphere, perhaps he would have really thought of going down for a soak. The television in the room was no longer controlled by the medical department, so all channels were open. However, Su Lu still habitually watched the news channel and channel 23. He was not a person who cared about the affairs of the Federation, but after escaping from the Donglin district, these bizarre encounters made him unable to not be concerned. That night, he saw the news about the accident of the spaceship flying from the Shinza Aviation Airport to S2. To be precise, it was the accident of the air-ground transfer cabin. Su Li's eyes narrowed slightly. His fingers tightened slightly as he stared at the clear holographic screen, watching the names and photos of the passengers gradually flashing on the screen. Zhang Xiaomeng, girl. Su Lu only heard these 4 words and saw the photo of a girl with a serious expression on the screen. Then, there was a buzzing sound in his brain, and he could no longer hear anything. The slightly sorrowful voice of the news anchor was automatically muted, and the photo on the screen gradually began to blur. Without the black-rimmed glasses, her bangs gently rippled in the breeze, and her eyes were smiling. She was as cute and charming as an elf. This was Zhang Xiaomeng, the real Zhang Xiaomeng. The one on the news and in the photo was all fake. Su Lu rubbed his eyes, turned off the television, and lay down on the bed. He covered himself with the quilt, curled up, and began to sleep. Although he couldn't sleep, he still began to sleep. His eyes were wide open, and his body was trembling slightly. He suddenly realized that the summer in the southern hemisphere of planet S1 was so cold. Unable to sleep in the middle of the night, his mood was like a sad song. He sat up silently, turned on the television again, and connected to the Federation's network. He entered the official website of the General Administration of Aviation and began to search. He kept refreshing the page, and after countless confirmations and verifications, he moved his fingers numbly. He lay on the bed, limp and powerless, and began to stare at the snow-white ceiling in a daze. At this time, he wished that everything he saw was just like those structural blueprints. They were all images in his mind and not real. But after staring at the snow-white ceiling for a long time, no images appeared in front of him. It turned out that, sleeping couldn't make the sad news he had heard before become fake. The next day, Su Lu woke up on time according to his biological clock. He brushed his teeth, washed his face, and ate breakfast. Then, he walked into the quiet garden in the morning light and sat on the slightly cold stone chair. His butt didn't touch the ground. He squatted in a strange position, using the horse stance that the uncle had taught him. At the same time, he carefully and attentively savored it, memorizing the tremor in his body, the existence of the sourness and the trajectory of its movement. The slightly warm tremor represented a mysterious force that had broken through the area that it had operated in the Donglin district back then. It gradually took over his entire body, causing every pair of muscle fibers to begin to rub against each other and squeeze against each other. It was incomparably painful and pleasurable. However, that bitterness lingered in his heart, lingering on his lips for a long time, making him want to vomit. His face was a little pale, and his eye sockets were a little deep, which outlined the outline of his small eyes a little deep. In the surrounding woods, several bodyguards of the Blackhawk Security Company were looking at the surrounding environment in boredom. Now that the situation had calmed down, their mission was not as important as it was a few days ago. They just didn't understand that Su Li's walk today seemed to be longer than it had been a few days ago. Su Li stayed in this quiet garden until noon. Then, he said something to the staff of the Tai family. Under the secret protection of several bodyguards, he walked out of the sanatorium and came to a steakhouse in the living area of the 1st Military Region. He began to eat Chinese food. Before eating, he handed a bill to the waiter and quietly asked for a favor. The knife and fork gently cut the delicate surface of the synthetic steak. Su Li lowered his head and slowly chewed the very uniform meat fibers. He didn't raise his head at all. Because he didn't dare to raise his head. He knew that once he did, he would see that the seat opposite him was empty. He and Zhang Xiaomeng had eaten together many times in the cafeteria. He was deeply grateful to the girl. She never left under the strange stares of the surrounding people just because he was an auditing student and looked like a poor concierge. His first official date with Zhang Xiaomeng was eating steak in a restaurant in Linhai. He was deeply grateful to the girl. She gave him the first love in his life. She gave him the first kiss, the first intimacy, and the first love. Even if it was charity, it was the most beautiful charity in the world. The waiter walked to his side. Hiding his puzzled expression, he handed over a bag of biscuits. After Su Li thanked him, he tore open the bag of biscuits, took out the puppy biscuits inside, and began to stare at them in a daze. The first time he and Zhang Xiaomeng met was because of a bag of puppy biscuits. Su Li began to eat the biscuits. His tears flowed down uncontrollably. After the uncle's death, he swore that he would never cry again. But today, he didn't know why, but he couldn't help it. He felt empty and sour in his heart, as if there would never be anything that could fill that empty space. Or maybe it was because of the news of Zhang Xiaomeng's death last night. Until this morning, when he was in a daze in the morning garden, the sour taste had been hidden for too long, and it stimulated his tear ducts. A well-dressed young man was crying silently in a lively restaurant. This was the living area of the 1st Military Region. There were many soldiers in civilian clothes and military uniforms, as well as their family and friends. Many people looked at the young man crying by the window in surprise, casting sympathetic or disdainful glances at him. They thought that the young man was crying because he was heartbroken, but they didn't know that the young man thought that he had lost his lover forever. After wiping away his tears, Su Li calmed down. He took out a letter and began to read it in silence. This letter was personally written by Shi Qinghai before he left. He had already read it once, but when he heard the news of Zhang Xiaomeng's death, he wanted to read it again. Because in his opinion, Shi Qinghai and Zhang Xiaomeng were the same kind of people. They were people that he didn't understand, but were willing to sacrifice something for their ideals. The last few paragraphs of Shi Qinghai's letter were written like this. I used to think that I was tired of being a spy. Even at the beginning, because of the misfortune that befell my father, I hated the Federation government so much. But in this gap, I felt tired and nervous, so I wanted to give up. It was also because of this that I began to try to leave the organization. Of course, it was the passive kind. I will never betray the organization because I agree with their ideals and respect them. But I was really tired, so I looked for many opportunities to become an unimportant person. The conflict in front of the nightclub was one of my attempts. I'm sorry that this matter dragged you down. However, just when I was at my most tired and began to doubt the ideals that I once believed in, I personally facilitated the agreement between the organization and Representative Pabre. Although I was only a link in the middle and never played an absolutely important role, I knew that I knew what I did. But I know that I did the right thing. It turns out that doing the right thing, for a numb person like me, can still bring some kind of spiritual joy. But at that time, I still wanted to leave. I didn't want to care about anything in the world anymore. I only wanted to drink wine alone and sing 27 cups of wine. When I had free time on the beach, I would think about my poor father, who had never been to the capital in his life, who only knew how to manage the small farm, and who eventually died a bizarre death. However, right at this time, my guide died in front of me. He jumped down from a very tall building, as if he jumped into the clouds, but fell to the ground. My teacher was actually very similar to my second father in many ways. It was very strange. Although I hated that traitor, I didn't let this hatred get to my head. Instead, I seemed to be much more clear-headed. Looking at my teacher's corpse lying on the roof of the car, I suddenly understood that I was still willing to fight for the ideals that I had in the past. This ideal is not laughable, nor is it something that is far and unreachable for the people, for you and me. We are just trying to make this world a bit more beautiful, a bit more fair. At the very least, there won't be people like the Thai family, the 7 great families, politicians, these kinds of existences that are above the law. At the very least, there will be fewer ordinary people who silently died like my father. True fairness has never appeared in this world. It didn't exist in the era of imperial power, it didn't exist in the current constitutional era, and it might not exist in the future. It doesn't exist in the empire, it doesn't exist in the Great Triangle, and sometimes I even suspect that it might not exist in the Green Dragon Mountain. However, what exists isn't always reasonable. What hasn't appeared before isn't something that can't be pursued. Fairness and justice might be very illusory words, but working hard for it is always better than being apathetic. There is a vague goal in front of you. If you walk, you will always be able to reach it. If you don't walk, you will never be able to touch it. I have carefully calculated that I will live for at most 90 years in this lifetime. People will always die. Since that is the case, I would rather die on the path that I have chosen. I am writing this letter to you not because I want to influence you, but because I am very lonely in this world. The role that I play is destined to be lonely, so I want to tell you my thoughts. I might not reconnect with the organization, because since we are walking on the same path, it doesn't matter whether we have companions or not, as long as we are working hard in the same direction. The fairness of this world doesn't necessarily require you to sacrifice everything you have. I have always believed that being a policeman who strictly abides by the law, being a lawyer who upholds justice, and being a warrior who bravely resists the invasion of the empire is a positive effort towards the fate of the Federation. You are a person with a somewhat overflowing sense of justice. If you live according to your thoughts, even if you can't influence this world, you can at least influence the small environment around you. In this sense, we are companions, and we have many companions in this world. Live, and then live well. Live with a clear conscience, and that is enough. Brother, I am going to find a clear conscience. Su-la silently folded the letter and put it in his inner pocket. There was also a business card and a new bank card, which were the most important things in his life. Then he thought of Zhang Xiaomeng from this letter. He still found it difficult to understand the thoughts of many people in the Federation, but after reading Shi Qinghai's letter again, he was somewhat moved. People will always die, and dying on the path that one has chosen may be a kind of happiness. Su-la quietly thought of Zhang Xiaomeng. The suspicion and anger that he had in the past were no longer important at this moment. Su-la was a very silent and direct person. He didn't understand principles, and he didn't have any ideas. He was a young man who lived by intuition and intuition. He slowly raised his head and looked at the news that was playing on the screen in the dining room. On the news, the political leader of the opposition, Senator Medellin, who was giving a speech at the Capital University, announced that he would participate in the presidential election at the end of the year as the running mate of Governor Ross of Jingzhou. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.